Very good. All right, I would like to call to order this committee of the whole meeting for Tuesday, April 5th. Number 227, and in honor of the Lewa Tool, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Lewa Nation. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. A recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, motion to approve. Councilor Paddock, second by Councilor Noble. Any opposed? Motion carries. Adoption of minutes from committee of the whole number 226. March 8th. Moved by Councilor Antonelli, second by Councilor Noble. Any opposed? Motion carries. And that takes us to the main event. Mr. Sikora, we're going to have our fourth budget session.
Great. Thanks for
Live and in person. Take your time with the new setup. Make it stay to the main event, so you'll have time. Thank you.
need a larger table.
Sorry.
Sorry. I just need to share my screen.
So far, so good, though. I like what I'm seeing.
I like this new setup too.
Yeah.
I can read this stuff on there.
Excellent. Thanks very much, everyone. I just wanted to start by highlighting where we were last time and kind of the intent of what we'll discuss today. So today I'll be presenting both the 5-year consolidated financial statements, which are preliminary and unaudited, as well as the 5-year plan. So the projects that we haven't discussed at the last sessions. So namely the 2023 through 2026 projects. We reviewed those briefly back last year, but wanted to get any additional feedback around that. And additionally, in looking at the consolidated 5-year plan, want to get your input around some of the assumptions that we have in place there. As a reminder, last time we met, we discussed the 5%, 6%, 7%, and 8% tax increase options. And what you'll see in the presentation today is a 5%, the 5% tax increase, which we went forward and incorporated. As a real caveat and reminder, as part of the process, we are still undertaking our year-end process and our audit process. So the numbers are going to continue to change, especially as we look at the reserves and some of the allocations. But you know, the intent is to really focus on 2023 and beyond today, take that feedback and incorporate those changes for our next session. And then I have presented in the report the dates as we've set forward. I did want to highlight that as we are just completing year end, there is a potential impact to that schedule. It may take a moment longer, but we're wanting to have everything wrapped up before May 15th per requirements. But we have put the provisionary dates, which we intend to meet, but we're working with the auditors. We just received the BC revised rule at the end of last week. We'll be incorporating all those over the coming weeks. So
Was there much change to the rule? Oh, sorry.
I haven't reviewed all the implications of it to give a very clear picture. So that will be coming soon. Guess we may as well get started. What I've got up here is Appendix A, and I did want to highlight that, you know, we're looking at our results as a snapshot in time here. So we've done our best to reflect a very accurate 2022 budget as well as beyond. But as we know, I think the implication of pressures that we're seeing from inflation, the statistics we're continuing to see, with CPI is really challenging to forecast. As I try to digest what we're seeing at a more macro level, I'm having a little bit of trouble reconciling our standard 2% assumptions in terms of our years forward. I've reflected our results here, notably in, is there a lag? Yeah, I've reflected the budget here to show a 2% increase across all of our future years in our routine operating expenses. But I wanted to have a bit of a discussion or present that forward to see whether it's prudent to look at reflecting a little bit higher increase. I might suggest discussing a 3% or even 4% in the interim might give us a little bit better hedge against some of the increases. But I did want to just highlight that what we have presented here is a 2% increase in future years. We have reflected the implication of our staffing plan as it stands. We have not included the community climate action plan in detail, as was discussed last month. There's consideration for that, and it will be reflected at some point, but it isn't expressly included in this plan. Very important, but in terms of detailing out the assumptions, we have not incorporated that into the 2023 through 2026 plan. And then below the revenue and expenditures lines here at the capital expenditure lines and some of the assumptions there, I've detailed what we'll see in Appendix B. So that I think is the meat of the discussion today, to really look at the details there and get any feedback. But before going there, I did want to see if there are any questions, seek any feedback, and assess whether it would be prudent to increase our inflation or CPI adjustment factors, especially looking into 2023.
Can you just speak to the fluctuations in the provincial transfers?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the assumptions there, I did take a very broad view of some of our funding for the waste or for the water treatment facilities. Again, we haven't secured any funding. We're looking at grants. In 2024, I put in a factor which is reflective of our ask. Similarly, in 2026, I've put in a placeholder for what I thought was a very conservative view for the proposed fire hall and municipal hall. Again, it's difficult to forecast what funding is available and what might be possible. Historically, there tends to be a higher proportion of grants received than there are forecasts. But just given that we have an over $8 million project proposed and an over $14 million project proposed, I did want to highlight that there is some request or hope that there's funding secured for those through those sources.
Thank you. Are there any questions before we talk to the inflation bit or on the inflation bit? Go ahead.
Yeah, if I might, lately I've been reading lots of articles, there goes my throat, because regarding police services.
Mm-hmm.
How's that going to reflect on us? I know we're not over the 5,000, but we still pay a percentage. So have you had any idea what that may cost us over the next bit of time? Because it's a huge increase for some communities.
Yeah, so it is not reflected here. It is something that, as we surpass that 5,000 threshold is of, a great concern and question as to how it's funded. I haven't reflected that. I think we're going to continue to look at the census data and try to understand when that does come into play. For context, I think that we would need to come back with more information in terms of what that total cost would be to reflect it. I don't know if it's worth exploring, or perhaps it is a question that we we would reflect or create a provision further out. I don't know, perhaps Sao Fraser, you might have some view as to whether there's any more color, but my understanding is we're kind of looking in slightly outside this time frame. That was the working assumption that I had, but might there be something that we should be reflecting?
Not to my knowledge, but I do think we need to be prepared for it as we move through the years. We do have, obviously, there's a move afoot through UBCM to see how some of the policing costs, when you get close to that cusp, start to transfer over, or if there's a way to sort of build into that. Instead of it all becoming one lump sum. And we have, the village has submitted a resolution to that effect to LMLGA, and hopefully will be accepted and move up to UBCM because it is a concern for a lot of smaller communities. So there's that element of things. Certainly the new policing agreement, where some of these larger communities are being impacted significantly because of the wage adjustments to RCMP are having an impact. That would be something that we would be looking at. I would think if we were already at 5,000 and over, we may see some increases over the next couple of years, but I'm not able to speak to that.
And then that's, as much as I appreciate that feedback, that was more what I was looking for, is will we be charged any of that retroactive costs for the new RCMP union agreement? Even though we're not at 5,000, we still pay a certain amount to RCMP, correct?
I don't believe so. I don't believe it is a direct cost to taxpayers of the village at this point. And it wouldn't, to my understanding, be until that threshold, but I can take note and confirm.
I'd just like to confirm that, because I saw Quinnell had a note in the paper today that, you know, some communities are looking at millions of dollars. So I'd just like to be sure, so that if we have to, we should maybe even now start creating a reserve for future RCMP situation, replacing, I guess we'll call it, not RCMP, who knows where we're going to be.
I do think, I mean, as Ms. Fraser mentioned, we have our resolution going down LGA. I had conversations with Sergeant Dykstra about it. First of all, and I'll speak to it a little bit later as well, just in terms of staffing and expenses and breaking out expenditures for the Pemberton area, as we were, as you know, part of the Sea to Sky corridor and then charged a percentage of. He wants to make sure that that's a fair representation for us. But I think, you know, deliberately I've started those conversations a little bit in terms of the 5,000 threshold. And I think the next council has to be, whether it fits into the 5-year plan or just right after, we're going to be getting pretty close to 5,000 somewhere in there. And I think it's something that should be bookmarked for budget conversations for the next council, definitely to look ahead. Projecting when we hit the 5,000 mark and when we pick up those additional costs, and hopefully what we can accomplish in the meantime in terms of how that transition happens, as Sheena mentioned, we'll see. But yeah, I think it should definitely be bookmarked and addressed, especially for a new council. Any other questions or thoughts on this bit?
Are we going to, excuse me, you talked about the Bank of Canada is trying to keep their 2.2 inflation rate. You're suggesting we should maybe be looking at 3 or maybe higher, so that we can start working that in towards the budget and making sure we meet those commitments?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a prudent option. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges that, you know, the Bank of Canada is being faced with and beyond is how to manage inflation, and we are seeing that pressure. We're seeing it initially forecast to be transitory. I think it's now a little more stagnant. You know, that is a view amongst many, and how many years we see that is I think a very challenging assessment to make. My view is, and from what we're experiencing with a lot of our vendors, we're seeing it with localized wage increases. We are seeing pressure across all of our contracts. We're seeing requests for double-digit price increases, which we're challenging and really trying to manage. We are seeing the implications of one of the largest employers in the region with their large wage increases start to surface in terms of the competitive wages in the sea to sky. And it's my view that we will continue to see that pressure at higher than 2%. So, I mean, I think it is prudent to probably raise the next year to a higher rate. Probably 3 would be reasonable. And, you know, with all of the measures that should return to a more normal inflation, I think, given that we can continue to revise our budget, you know, at 2% further on is reasonable. But yeah, I would certainly recommend a higher rate in the next year.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's our job to err on the side of conservative anyways when projecting ahead, and it's just a good thing to have in that 5-year projection. And I agree with the pressures, even feel the pressures in our region will continue to remain strong, even if inflation overall starts to drop down. I think this guy will continue to feel for some of the reasons you listed. So anybody else have thoughts on that? Are we good at having Mr. Sikora include what do we want to look at, a 3% increase for the 5-year projection?
What does that mean for the taxpayer?
Certainly we'll try to balance that and reflect it in the plan so that we're planning ahead and evaluating and preparing for that. I think that, you know, the steps we're taking to manage reserves, you know, the ability to distribute and plan for the future will allow a little bit more prudent fiscal planning. I think that immediately, given that, you know, we'd be looking to reflect this in 2023 or beyond, there's no immediate tax collection. So I think it's providing a more realistic view of how we fund some of our operations and projects in the village of Pemberton and ensure that there's less surprise if we were to see higher cost pressures in future years.
But I understand the reasons why we would do it. It sounds like it's a good idea.
Mhm.
But for the taxpayer, is this an assumption that instead of like a 5% rate increase, we would be looking at 10, or how does it play out?
Not necessarily. I think that you know, on balance of total collections and expenditures, my view is so taxation could show an assumption of an increase. That's one possibility. And that could be direct. Say we increase the taxation line item by that same amount. There's a possibility that forecasts could be coming at a higher rate than the 2% included. So that would be reflected along with all of our other assumptions. But I think it notably provides a more realistic view of what our expenditures really will be, so that there isn't a disparity between the two.
And it doesn't suggest, like, to add to that, it doesn't imply that will be directly related to taxation next year. It's just to say, hey, let's take a realistic view of what's coming and be prepared for it, so we know what our numbers are looking like. In an ideal world, it doesn't go up, you know, beyond 2%, and then the budget reflects it next year. So it certainly doesn't lock it into that.
Because we're looking at a 5-year plan, starting in 23 for your 5-year plan, I would like to see us put in RCMP services and start building a reserve so that over the next number of years, when eventually hook in, whether it's 26 or 30, that we have reserves in place. So it's not going to be as hard on the people. We've done that with water, we've done that with sewer. So that if, I'm just going to throw out some numbers, so we start at 25 in 23, the next year it's 50, the next year it's 100 and 150, and then maybe we cap it at 150, so that in 5 or 6 years, maybe we've got $500,000 or 600,000 that's there. That's going to take some pressure off, because there's nothing, I think, worse than hitting people with a 10% tax increase or 15%, because we haven't planned. So I think for me going forward, this is the right time to make a decision. If we wait till the next council, nothing will happen till 24. And I guess I'd like to err on the side of caution. The next council could come in and decide they don't want to do that, which would be fine. But I think it'd be prudent to take a look at it.
And in terms of reflecting it in the budget starting next year, would that be something in which you would want to have any more information around when that forecast 5,000 threshold is in place? Like, is it something that you'd want, a 5-year lead up? Does it matter the time in which that large increase would occur, or is that kind of moot? Is it the intention that reserve begin?
I guess what I'm trying to figure out, and I guess this is a little more work, which I hate to create for you. But if we could project, what's it gonna cost us for police services when we hit 5,000?
Mhm.
I like to know that number, and then I like to go backwards. So in other words, let's say we get with a $300,000 increase in cost, which when you look at the new services contract, that adds up to about 2.5 police people.
Mhm.
My concern is if we don't have that in the bank at $20,000 for 1%, as a 15% tax increase.
Mhm.
So I guess if we could go backwards from that and kind of get an idea and then see, do we do it from 23 to 27? And do we have enough money to start covering that? In which case it'll already be in place. It'll be a slow increase. And I go with Councilor Antonelli says we don't hit the taxpayer all at once, or we won't be here next time.
Mhm.
So if that's possible, I certainly would like to have a look at that.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be prudent to do that going forward on a 5-year plan.
Certainly. I can take a look at that, and I suppose perhaps just help me with the timing of what that looks like in terms of incorporating changes for the next meeting before bylaws
We would
and so
need-
forth.
well, I would assume that some of this work would take some time to do, and we have Easter in the middle, so we would have to come back and have another working session on April 26th. And that doesn't give us very much time to be able to incorporate the bylaws. We have to have the bylaws adopted by May 16th, so that we are proposing, if we can't make the April 26th deadline, that we would do 2 special meetings the week of, I think it's April 9th or May 9th, in order to get the bylaws passed.
Yeah, I don't want to go through a whole bunch of trouble, but I think it shouldn't take a whole bunch of time to phone a couple of communities that are 5,000, say, what is your policing costs?
No, certainly. In terms of process, I just want to be mindful of that on timing. And I think as I think about it as well, if we include a provision for an increase in non-statutory reserves going forward, if I present something which is reasonable and with some of that high level assumption, I think in future years, we don't necessarily have an immediate demand on taxpayers, but providing that insight, I think, would be very helpful and effective. So I could put a best assessment in future years and likely just include that in a non-statutory reserve provision for now.
That way we
Yeah.
wouldn't have to change the bylaws, we wouldn't have to do that. So that'd be great, Thomas.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I think if it's bookmarked and this work is happening over the next year, it doesn't have to be right there right now because there's too many assumptions are unknown. But that work, I agree, we gotta start planning for it, so it's not one big hit.
Mhm.
So I feel that we can move ahead with the 5-year projection and get a lot of that work done afterwards.
That sounds good. I'll have that reflected for next time.
Much appreciated.
Any other thoughts on this part of the budget? Shall we go to capital expenditures?
Can we get direction from the committee of the whole with respect to the 5-year? Are we going to look at increasing the?
So a motion, do you want a motion to have the CPI increased to 3% across the board for the 5-year financial plan?
Mhm.
And would you like it across each of the years or just 2023?
Each year.
I'd say at least the first 2 years anyway.
Yeah.
Realistically,
And the next time, the next people can change it
Yeah,
to 4
so-
or go back to 2 if they have to.
So 3% for 2023
3 in 2024.
and 2024.
I'll make that motion.
Seconder, for the discussion. Any opposed? Motion carries.
And then can we get that the committee of the whole
Motion.
supports reflecting an increase in the non-statutory reserves to account for policing.
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Second, for the discussion. Opposed, motion carries. Okay, thank you. So we'll go on to capital expenditures then.
Capital expenditures. Appears our TV isn't wide enough.
Can we make it smaller?
Yeah, I can just
He's got to stand back.
There's the plus and minus up there.
didn't make it as a stand-up, huh?
Stick to numbers.
And so as a reminder, just to familiarize everyone with the way I've presented this, last time we looked at it, there was both a combination of our some of our larger operating expense or projects which are classified as operating expenses, as well as the capital projects. So list was longer. Here, what I'm truly trying to do is reflect our capital expenditures. And what I presented in front of you here, I've included funding, the funding along the right-hand side for the 2023 through 2026. That's simply assumptions. As I said earlier, we're very hopeful and the team works very hard to apply for grants, to look for all opportunities to support a lot of the capital projects. However, it is also very difficult to forecast this many years out, well ahead of some of the windows for funding those grants as well, or various sources. As we previously discussed in a little more depth, the 2020 projects, including all of the funding and that being more granular in terms of reflection, I'll maybe ask that we focus on 2023 through 2026, because we've already had a lot of those discussions. But again, there shouldn't be too many surprises in terms of the projects as we have had these discussions before. That said, I would like to go through them and seek any feedback. And I do think as well that we may have a few staff on the line. I don't know if we wanted to perhaps, Ms. Kennedy, invite any of the staff, potentially Mr. Chimo on as a panelist.
Would you like brought in?
Sure, let's go live.
I think he has the majority of the projects listed here.
We like him to attend in person?
Yeah,
You want me to walk down and get him?
I'll do that. Is he listening?
He's now on the panel.
You want me there or here?
You don't get to hide in your office.
Okay.
You don't get to hide in your office.
Yeah, what is it?
Thanks for making the commute.
Yeah. You haven't had time to get here. A new course, is that an expense for us?
Yes.
I like them.
You're very visible.
Very nice. Yes, it is.
Excellent. So I guess I'll start at the top and highlight a few of the projects that are in the plans for future years. Starting with the admin department. I think in line with some of the initiatives with the community climate action plan, there's additional e-charging station provisions in 2024 for $150,000. There's a municipal hall upgrade or a municipal hall line item here, which, forgive me for jumping around, but I've reflected the scope of both fire hall and the municipal hall as two separate line items. As council may recall, there's work underway for a preliminary request for scoping of that, assessing sites, feasibility study, and this is a very high level provision right now for that scope. So you'll see that reflected as both fire hall replacement to accommodate trucks which would fit in a hall, meeting increased demand with growth in the community, so on and so forth. And those two line items make up that project. Additionally, in 2023, there's the provision for website upgrades to upgrade the aging infrastructure online.
If I might ask, could we just ask as we go along? The 2 million for the new building, it's under boring. But we have almost enough capital assets we can sell in land to cover that cost, so if that happens going forward, then that obviously will change that value there, right?
Yeah, I mean, the funding is still not decided, secured. I put in a small provision, as you saw, for grants. And I think part of assessing the scope and scale of the project involves really understanding everything from needs to how we'll fund it, available land. Like, part of the review involves assessing all of those things. And as it's so far out in the plan, I think we'll continue to see if it's financially viable and how we could arrive at that as well. But it's not set in stone by any means.
Placeholder essentially.
Yeah,
Placeholder, yeah.
and if I could ask again, I see over the next 2 years, we're planning $550,000 for EV. We got 150.
Yes, 150.
And this year we've got 400.
That's right. I think
What are we doing that creates that huge cost? I mean, how do we ever get the money back on that?
well, I think it's probably a little bit broader question. I think Mr. Chima might be able to speak a little more to the projects, but
Well, sorry, so what is the other value that you're referring to, or the?
Under yours,
so we have also in Public Works, we have electric vehicle chargers, which is,
So that's largely grant funded, as far as I
that's correct.
understand. The one in admin, 150,000, I believe, is to have for the future electrification of our fleet. So these, the ones in Public Works would be the public stations, which we would charge for usage, as in cost for usage for people to charge on, and that's something that is mainly grant funded, but we also want to encourage to, as part of the climate action plan goals. But then this admin one, I believe would be just for the admin offices so that we could eventually get electrify our office vehicles.
okay, and I guess that's why I ran into a problem, because if you go across the funding, there was no indication of funding, so I presume that came by the capital
I think that
With the
the
three-
goal would be to find a grant for that, something.
for that 399,000.
Oh, for that.
That would be, and as I described earlier, I left the 2022 funding details off of this here spreadsheet, as we discussed a lot of those previously. But yes, I mean, that would be, with, I can actually, I don't have the spreadsheet up, but I could confirm afterwards exactly.
Yeah, and I guess that's what threw me off when I went through it and it was an updated one.
Yeah,
I started going through that whole scenario under Public Works, and I thought, what happened to these were supposed to be grants, and there was nothing on that whole column, so that I had to ask those questions.
of course, and apologies about the confusion there.
No, it's not
Yeah.
confusion, it's just, I'm glad we sorted it out because we don't have the money.
Yeah, I mean, like bike skills park, soccer field, those are all.
Those I understand.
Yes.
I knew they were grant, but I didn't know the EV charging system was grant, so. And I don't have as much concern, other than I hope we can get some return on our investment on those things.
I got the grant with the Whistler,
Yeah, with a combination of Squamish.
and to that point, I would like to see that 150 shifted over to 2023 in the hopes that we find grants. I mean, it's really
It
just a
does
deep.
mention grants too, but.
Yeah, that one does. It's not
Mhm.
2024. And I'm just saying, I want to be out there every year. I'd like to see a line item every year to make sure we're providing electrification options here for the office, for our fleet, and for residents and visitors. So as long as there's a grant available every year, I'd like to see us apply and keep installing that infrastructure. So small detail, but for me, that belongs on every year.
So would you want to split that up, 75 for next year and 75 for the next year, so we can
Well, no, I
show?
mean, again, it's under grants there, so my point is that every year I'm hoping that we will be looking for grant opportunities
keep
to add an EV charger everywhere and anywhere we can.
Yep.
So
No, that's good.
just in terms of that forecast, again, it's more of a detail, it's more
Mhm.
awesome.
If I can maybe address that, I think that just the reasoning for that was maybe to coincide with potentially
I know,
new facilities.
I got
And also with, like, we could, for this one, given that it would be for our own fleet, we don't have the vehicles yet, so I think that would, I'm not sure if there's grants to cover purchase of electric vehicles, but I know, I absolutely see your point. If there's grants available, we can, Snapchat it.
And that's just the funny line that I've mentioned before, that I feel like we're dancing as well. So we don't, when we talk about what is the line at which point we start converting our fleet full commitment over to electric, well, we don't have the infrastructure to charge it. Well, so which are we doing first here? We got to do one first to get this process going. So whether it's getting, so, or at least in lockstep with each other. But I feel like often that conversation goes, well, we should get the next truck should be electric. Well, we can't charge it. Can't get a charger unless we have electric trucks, So I feel like we have to make that jump sooner than later.
And I think,
Cart, which is the horse.
and I think that's a great point, like we can reflect that. And I think the other element to that is we look at our community climate action plan is understanding how we can get there. I think there's a lot of great examples of this where others are studying how to electrify their fleets. I think there's examples with converted EV Mustangs for these sorts of applications, and costing that in with the community climate action plan, I think is going to be a very important and exciting next step too. And that requires a little bit of support and a little bit of assessment to properly reflect that. So we have this infrastructure supporting and working in tandem. So I guess just to clarify, would you like to see an increase then? I think it would be reasonable to do that.
Again, we're hopeful, there might be some matching components or whatever grants we look at over the years, but I think we're relying on grants as well. So to me, it might as well be reflected.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Now, if I might, you just brought up vehicles, so we have two Village of Pemberton cars.
Admin.
So they're 2 years old now, so what do we look at trading them in at 5 or 7 years?
I think that might have had something to do with the justification of 2024. I think that the conversation around vehicles was, because I think those are more than 2 years now.
Is it, maybe
I
it's,
think it's two.
We've had them as long as I've been here, and I'm coming on 3 years.
Oh, okay. and then that's what I want to look at, and that's why I want to reflect what you were saying. That the next vehicles we get, we should be minimum hybrid, but we should be going fully electric. So I'm just wondering, should that be reflected in capital expenditures going forward? New vehicles, because you mentioned the Mustang Mach-E. Friends were just looking at one. The minimum is 67,000. And if you get anything on it, like if you want a steering wheel and tires, it's 73. That's a huge increase from what we paid for these two vehicles. So again, to go back to your point, it's not just the electric charging stations that's the cost. All of a sudden, if we get two more vehicles, now we're looking at 150,000 compared to these two vehicles probably didn't cost us 50,000. So where do we start reflecting that? Because I think like the mayor, those things start to concern me, because as 2030 comes, all of a sudden that's going to get compacted down to, we're going to get hit with a huge cost for all these things.
I think from my perspective with your direction, I think the work that will come out of the plan and with a dedicated expert to review and provide feedback around what the next 5 years and beyond looks like. I think that really capturing that, noting and ensuring that we've got priority around it, but reflecting that in more depth at our next council's next pass at this 5-year plan. So next fall and into the new year will be a very excellent opportunity to reflect the implications in that that lockstep plan that does take into consideration, a broader range of factors, like everything we've discussed with infrastructure, cart before the horse. I think that right now it is a little challenging to reflect early replacement of some of our equipment, which many of which are under loan, so forth. So it may be a good opportunity to really dedicate those resources for the next iteration of the budget. I think as we go through this, there are other factors that need to be balanced as well. But I certainly would welcome your input as to whether we do reflect a broader placeholder for that. But at this point, I think it is important to reflect it sooner rather than later. But with the complexity of the proposal, with the adoption or the review of it only happening quite recently, I think it's not been fully digested and reflected yet.
I think a lot of that information will come out through the work, now that our climate action plan is presented and however we find that work. And I think it's a great question, but there's just so many unknowns there to really start reflecting that. Hopefully costs go down, on that.
Good luck.
But yeah, I think as we move through the plan next year, there'll be a lot more information for the council to be able to include that in the 5-year plan next year. I think it's good thoughts.
And I'm almost wondering, when we're talking about this now, and what we hear now is 2030 is what they're looking at to try and get everything off fuel type of thing. I'm almost wondering, should we be looking at a 7-year plan? Like a 5-year plan, we're 2 years out from where we want to be.
Oh, I see.
See what I mean?
2030.
Like right now, we're going to 26, next year 27. But are we really reflecting what we want to have by 2030? And should we be planning that extra 3 years ahead of time? I know that's hard to do because I think everybody agrees we can't guess at what the prices are going to be. But again, I come back to reserves and we start to be looking at those kind of things. So those things concern me a lot going forward because, again, the taxpayer can't be hit with one huge hit all at once. So I don't know. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks.
We should probably put our order in for a new truck. I heard they're like a year away from.
Is that right?
That's what I've heard, that people that trying to order even non-electric vehicles are going back order.
Yeah.
These, all the electric vehicles now for their.
Year to 2 out.
Go ahead.
I just have a comment about the boardwalk replacement for $1 million several years out there. And I wouldn't expect any changes today, but I think staff in the long term should look at the opportunity cost of that $1 million and what we can do to look at more permanent options that don't need replacing. Would it be every 10, 15, or 20 years? For that style of boardwork, but I just think that if we gave it some thought, we could replace it in a way that's amazing and doesn't cost $1 million. And that money could be put into recreation in other ways. Because, even if it does cost or take 20 years to replace that, that's $50,000 a year, so it's just, to me, for 200 meters of trail, it's an enormous expense that I think if we put our minds to it, we could come up with something that was just amazing, but didn't cost that.
If may I comment? So that price tag was one estimate. It was the highest one that we got. We were looking at basically completely rebuilding the whole thing, using a different style of helical screw posts. It includes the environmental work as well as design and everything. I think we would definitely look to get those costs down significantly. One thing that I've been looking at is potentially reducing the amount of boardwalk by using some areas where there is land potentially. That has environmental impacts as well. So it's just, it was too broad of a project scope, like especially with the environmental needs, to be able to confidently say, well, we can do it for this much, that we went and we used our sort of our highest value. But as for replacement costs, I mean, that part of our, we spend about 5 or 10,000 right now per year just to maintain it to the sort of usable level. And I think everyone can agree that it's in pretty bad condition even after those repairs that we make. So the goal was to replace it in a way that would be permanent, permanent work. So we don't have to do work every year. But in terms of reducing the scope, like I said, we would obviously try and keep the costs down to a minimum, but I don't know. I'd have to get direction, I guess, from council on we talked about removing one section completely and running trails sort of off the north end without getting into too much of the detail. But I understood that there would not be much of an appetite for removing any sections of boardwalk. We were going to take down as many of the bridges that there were that could be done using land, especially on the rock side, to reduce maintenance as well, like build trails that way. So it's definitely on, part of our scope and in our mind. But as for that dollar value, I do think that it would end up being less than that, but we have to do more investigation to know.
I wonder if that's a project that, I know it's more work in the short term, but to have that project flushed out and shelf ready, so that if there were some grants there, and I know it's something you can't work on right now off the side of your desk and go, oh, it needs a design with those considerations, with ecological considerations, so if somebody could put that together for us so that we understand the cost and could be ready, shelf ready for any grant opportunity.
And we've actually already identified this as one that we're looking for a grant for. In fact, we already have a couple of grants in mind.
But are we in a place to be able to plan?
I think that we are. We've already put in our environmental application. We've done the environmental work, which is the hardest part in my mind. Now is a long waiting time. So we do have the interesting, I get asked about the boardwalk all the time. And, this is in bad condition. What are you doing about it? And unfortunately, we can't do much about it until we get the environmental approvals. But we have the benefit right now of a period of time where we've got the application in place. And while we're waiting, if there is a grant opportunity that comes up, it would probably be a design build type of thing. And as I said, we've gotten even a couple proposals from people. So I think that we're at a place that we could put enough detail into a grant application. We've done it with less for some grants that we've gotten money for, like a lot of these design build ones. That's the catch, is we don't have money to design it until we get a grant. And so I think this would be a fairly easier one to apply for than some that we've done. So I
Having that full design.
I don't think you necessarily need a full design, and we have a bit of a design scope already from our proposals. Like some people have done work already and like they've proposed, okay, this is what the cross section would be, and you can just multiply that by the distance type of thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's certain points like pinch points and so forth that would require special attention, but especially with trails, I think trails, you generally don't have like a full 100% design of a trail. It's a lot of times it is field fit. So I think that we'd be in a position if there was a good grant opportunity. We've tried to break it down a little bit as well to spread some of the costs. Like there's a couple bridges that we've identified as needing replacement, and we've put those all into the same environmental application so that we can get everything approved at the same time. But we could also knock one thing off at a time in smaller chunks. And the boardwalk is going to be the biggest one, obviously. But as I said, I would like to actually remove certain sections of it where possible. Because, as you say, wood boardwalk, like it's exposed to the elements here. It's going to always require a lot of maintenance. Mm-hmm. So even no matter how well you build it, it will require maintenance. And it's not like we're going to build steel or anything. So it is a bit of a tough one.
Is it possible on the north end to fill that in and put a dirt
So that's sort of what I was referring to on, like, I had looked into this when we were doing that new fish channel.
Yeah,
And, you know, we built that trail beside it. Part of the idea was maybe we could connect that. and do
run that
something-
down to the highway.
Something similar, again, there would be pretty substantial environmental, now, the benefit of that project was we did it with DFO as a fish habitat restoration project, so that side channel, the object of that project was not to build a trail, it was to clear the channel so that the cold water actually could get into the lake and it would provide fish habitat. And then the channel or the side trail we justified it for access to be able to do those maintenance activities in the future, so we have to clear beaver dams and so forth. So, but then we have a new recreational trail out of it. I think it would be a lot more difficult to justify that all the way down to the highway there. But there's potential. I mean, it is a wetland, so it would be doing work within a stream, so it would need those full approvals. And right now, what we've applied for, the approval for, is basically read the whole thing that's there. I'm sure we could do some minor adjustments, but I don't know if we'd be able to fill in land in a wetland
Mhm.
for that purpose.
It just seems long term, that would make
Yeah.
a huge amount of sense.
But I think it would be technically destroying more fish habitat.
Okay,
Mr. Scott, there was a contribution commitment from SLRD funds for Boardwalk. Is that reflected anywhere? Are you aware of that?
I haven't reflected it here. I'd have to look at that detail.
A couple years ago, and it was sort of bumped as we keep
Yeah.
looking ahead as in terms of what we end up doing, but there was a commitment there, so it'd be nice to have that in the books.
And that's a future commitment from.
It was for when we were ready to do the project, money was there if we did it last year.
it was 50,000.
Was it only 50? I thought it was even more. Or was it two
I
payments?
thought there were 3 payments.
Yeah.
That was,
Oh, is that what it was?
that was
Oh, okay.
what was in my head. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
I'll go with that. We'll hold you.
I'll dig that up and make sure it's reflected.
That's with our consultant on that.
Yeah.
Okay, any more, we're good on admin, I take it? Any questions on the fire department? Before we go back to public works? My only question, if I could, is the trucks all are marked borrowing. Some of the reserves we're putting aside in the fire department, are those sort of bookmarked?
It would be bookmarked between the two, yes. Okay. Yeah. And as a reminder, I think one of the challenges when we look at the fire hall is fitting a ladder truck in the hall. Of course, there's implications on our insurance rate and FUS certification, so on and so forth. So just being mindful of that. We have also heard of a lot of cost escalations in the price of trucks and actually the ability to get these trucks too. So a little bit of risk in terms of that. Pardon?
The electric ones are gonna be cheaper.
Well, they're starting to release them, but they're not anywhere near this price at that point.
Any other questions on fire? Okay, go back to public works then.
So starting at, and apologies, it's PDF. So we've got 20, 23, 24, 25, 26 up top. Starting at 2023, reflecting the snow blower attachment for the loader for $30,000. We've discussed the boardwalk replacement in 2024 and a snow clearing truck provision for 2025. And the idea there, which is not reflected in full, and it's a complete cost estimate at this point, but there may be some salvage value on the Western Star as well.
Questions?
To water projects. Starting in 2023, additional zone meters are in there for 20,000. The test well and infiltration project for 30,000. The big one, which you'll see was reflected with part of the borrowing assumptions, is the $8.1 million water treatment facility. And that's, I believe grant has been submitted, or application has been submitted for that. And later on in 2025 and 2026, I've got the water feasibility and water source for 100,000 and industrial park looping for 500,000.
Any questions on that?
And then in sewer projects, reflected the Walnut Lift Station upgrade for $300,000 in 2023, and lift station number 1 for 100,000 in 2024. Questions? And then lastly, I did just leave reserves listed here as well, just to show some assumptions that we would potentially continue along a similar contribution in future years, as we've discussed previously. But I have reflected the operational and general reserve increases of 3% and 2% as well. So those have been captured as per direction last time.
I guess I'm always concerned about reserves. In the study we did years ago, and I've referenced this before, they said we should be putting $500,000 a year aside for roads. We're putting $40,000 aside. That doesn't get very close to what we need. $40,000. I don't know, what does it fix the corners and a few potholes these days, Tom? Mr. Sorry.
Do the stretch of road with what we've done.
Yeah, just resurface it. So again, I'm concerned about that. I mean, I walk the roads every day. No, it doesn't sound very good, does it? I walk around the community every day, and some of our roads they're in need of a little bit of work, I think, aren't they?
We do also have a roads maintenance budget every year, sort of a set amount. Where we try and do smaller resurfacing projects, as you know, every year. Last year we weren't able to get some of our paving projects done, mainly because of supply chain issues and contractors. But we're already starting now. Are hoping to do a lot in the spring, since we had a list from last year that didn't get done. But in terms of how much should be being put into reserves, I support putting more, but there's only so much money as well, right?
But again, it's either we start today or we get hit with a chunk down the road. And how do we do that? With, again, I'd rather every year pay an extra $50 as a taxpayer, rather than in 5 years get hit with $250 kind of thing. So I don't know where does that saw-off come? It really makes it tough. Like if I budget for myself, I look ahead and say, okay, how much does it make sense? So when it comes into that period, I've got the money to buy a new truck or a washing machine or whatever.
I think we need to look at our reserves as a whole and talk about where the priorities are. And that's something we do sort of through every budget process, but that our 5% increase this year is potentially going a large chunk to reserve as well. So I think it's a bit of a yearly decision, but I think it's a bigger discussion over all of our reserves. I agree with the roads, but what other equipment you talk about, vehicles. I think we need to look at all our reserves in that light.
Yeah, I think the other exciting element to reviewing reserves right now, because excellent points, and as we discussed when we allocated increased reserves at prior sessions, I think the exciting part is we're well underway in the asset management study right now, in and around the next month, and we'll work on schedule. But the consultants that have been engaged with our grant will be presenting to council, to mayor and council, with recommendations and engage on a risk assessment of what the future looks like with reserves. So they've made a lot of progress already in evaluating our current position of our assets, and replacement schedule will be part of that as well. So I think that should provide a lot more color in terms of the health of the assets and the requirements of reserves to help support that too. So that's coming very quickly.
Okay. Any questions, thoughts? Okay. Where do we go from here? Do you need any other direction from council for your next moves?
I think that's really been very helpful. I think I've got a lot of direction with a few of those changes to incorporate. And where we go from here is I come back in a couple of weeks and ask for a little more steer and then eventually to bylaw adoption and the next steps of the process is outlined.
I think the plan, if we stay on track, will be to bring the bylaws forward for first, second, and third reading on the 26th of April. And then to have them adopted on the 28th, because we have a special meeting to adopt the
Just for
bylaws.
adoption.
Because we don't have a council meeting till May 17th, so we're not in a position to meet the deadlines that the province sets out for reporting. However, if we have some delays, just because we're getting the numbers all together and that, then we would look to come on the week of May 9th, I believe it is, and have a special council meeting on the 10th to do for second and third reading, and then adoption on May 12th.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Great job.
Special meetings or what?
We would just actually came up with that conclusion on the weekend, so we'll get those out.
Because I may already have appointments and such.
Yeah, because I plan to be away from the 21st until the 28th,
21st of
or the 28th.
So you might think 26th council.
Well, no, because when it came to us, it could be the 26th, it could be the 10th, so. You know, it never came out as specific.
No, we have a regular
Regular
council
council
meeting
meeting on the 26th of April.
It got changed because of the long weekend.
No.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
because of the Easter.
Oh, you mean
weekend, we
then
moved it, yeah.
as opposed to the
That
second or?
was set in November,
Mhm.
so.
Okay, and when you say the data is sent out, bear in mind, it's for adoption, so it should be a pretty quick meeting, so you don't have to take too much time on it, right?
Yeah, we'll send out save the dates for May 10th and 12th and for May 28th, or April 28th. But if we meet the April 26th schedule, then we'll just do the 28th,
Yeah.
and that will just be for
And again,
adoption.
that's just for adoption, so if you're not here for adoption, then it's not.
But I can come in on Zoom if I have to.
Yeah.
Yep,
And I may just have to change the dates around a little bit, so I'm back on the 20th.
Zoom would be a good option in case.
for special council meetings, we have the flexibility of having everybody attend by electronic means. For regular, we don't.
Yeah.
Unless it's an emergency situation where, like a health situation like we've had, or an emergency where we can't possibly all get together. So.
Did that change? Because I thought we kept it open so that we can attend meetings.
But not everybody,
Not everyone.
not everyone.
So as long as the mayor's here, we're all okay to be away.
We
On
just need Ted to
April,
hold the
on
fort.
April 26th, we are bringing back the procedure bylaw changes to have a discussion to see where council sits as per council's direction, to bring it back after 6 months so that we've used it, to get feedback on how everybody feels about it. It's going to be a little bit challenging because of course we went into all meetings in January being online because of the increase in COVID. So we want to have a further discussion at a later date too about that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, we are on to number 5. There's no presentation on this. This is regarding the BC Electoral Boundaries Commission, looking for input on our boundaries. We've seen the federal one change a couple times over the years. Is there anything this council would like to provide input on in terms of our boundaries?
They're not actually proposing any changes at this point,
No.
so it's just if we are unhappy, then, or if we think that there should be changes, then this is an opportunity to put them forward.
No, I'm happy with it.
Has there been any issues flagged, mayor and council over the years with the current boundaries?
Not so much with the BC. I remember going through the federal shift. Remember, we were part of the north and or we were down here, and then we got sent up part of the north, which Chilliwack, right down to Chilliwack. It was the weirdest sort of line drawn, and then now we're back to what we are federally. So I think it's just a review to see if there is anything. I haven't heard anything.
I haven't heard
Makes sense.
anything.
Well, the only thing that comes to mind for me was that if I'm remembering, it was very close and there was, am I confusing the elections? But the green guy almost got in, and then it was the liberal. And I'm wondering if we change the boundaries, would that shift at all? Like, so West Vancouver, to me, it's sort of intuitive that it would be with the city, not with Sea to Sky. So if West Vancouver was cut off, would it change? Would it have changed that outcome?
Well, West Vancouver, to your point, I think is like the majority of the deciding factor in our region.
Exactly.
And as Squamish and Worcester have grown and Pemberton, that's shifted a little bit. There's no question it would have been different had West Van not been in there. And so I think it's a good point. I guess what I worry about is if we were to carve off the Sea to Sky away from West Van, they're not going to just go a Sea to Sky riding. It won't go that small. So we get pushed back up to, again, last time we were Lillooet right through to Chilliwack.
And the Chilcotin again.
Yeah.
We don't
so
want that.
I hear your point, because yes, West Van definitely
Mhm,
almost decides in the election to a certain.
mhm.
It's also population numbers to take into account, which is why then they would have to try to make up,
Yeah.
you know, there's all this calculations that take place, so as I understand it, but.
Yeah, we're either going south, which I fear has to capture West Van, and Sunshine Coast, right?
Mhm.
Sunshine Coast,
in Bowen Island.
Yep.
So that's all captured as well. We go north, so that's even less representative person. I hear your point.
But we could include Braymore, and I mean, there's big.
Oh,
population.
then we're good. Okay, so nothing to follow up there. We'll leave that. Okay, so you don't need a motion then.
On a motion? Okay.
All right, then just a motion to adjourn committee of the whole. For a second, any opposed, we're adjourned. Take 5 minutes. Okay, for all good, I'm gonna call to order this regular council meeting 1558 for Tuesday, April 5th. And in honor of the Lewa Tool, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Lewa Nation. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. A recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, can I get a motion to come on in?
Oh, is this the meeting?
This is the meeting.
There's seats over in the front right here.
Sorry to interrupt.
It's all good. We're just getting started. Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Councilor Noble, seconded by Councilor Paddock. Any opposed? Motion carries. Rise with a report from in camera. We have a number. So council is rising with a report on the following items that were approved at the in-camera meeting number 1557 held March 8th. The first is with regards to the airport lease template. The new airport lease template was approved and staff were directed to proceed with negotiations with Pemberton Soaring Center, Blackcomb Helicopters, and Henry Holdings. Staff have also been directed to research and develop a fee structure for the airport lease applications that includes a deposit in the amount of $5,000 and bring back to a future committee the whole meeting for review. Staff has also been directed to develop an airport snow and ice policy, a removal policy that is based on the current policy and bring back for consideration by council. And staff has also been directed to send correspondence to the airport leaseholders advising that the village is agreeable to the leaseholders arranging for regular winter snow clearing of the runway and taxiways at the airport at their own expense and subject to operational conditions being met. Council also rose with a report from the in-camera meeting held earlier today on the following. Council confirmed the 2022 airport lease rate at $2.12 per square meter and reaffirmed that the lease rate will increase by the BC Consumer Price Index each year. Council directed that a fair market evaluation and comparison of airport lease rates be undertaken in 2023 in anticipation of future lease renewals that this initiative be included in the 2023 budget deliberations for consideration. Adoption of minutes from regular council meeting 1557 from Tuesday, March 8th, moved by Councilor Noble, seconded by Councilor Craddock. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising? Seeing none, no business arising from the committee of the whole or committee minutes. So this evening we have, we're going to start around number 11. We have 3 delegations. And we're going to start off with Mr. Scott Kerr from Sea to Sky Soils, who will be attending electronics. He's there too. And are we going to see them up there? Yeah. Excellent. This is our first day with all this technology, so we're working our way through all.
What's your head?
Oh,
Sorry, as I clicked on become a panelist, it kicked out for a second there. Have you turned it over to me? Can I get it?
Yeah, we can see you and hear you. So when you guys are good to go, the table's yours. Thanks for joining us.
Great. Well, thanks very much for the time here. Really just wanted to take a chance to sort of give the Mayor and Council an update on what's been happening at Sea to Sky Soils over the last little while, and talk through what can be expected for the year ahead, and also introduce a new kind of stakeholder here. Let's see if I'll just share my screen here. One sec. Got a couple slides to go through. So yeah, here's kind of the overview on what we're looking at. Really just those 3 things. The first one being introducing Evergen, who is a new major shareholder in the operation. So based in Metro Vancouver, we're keeping it kind of local, but they bring some extra resources to the organization and have kind of a mandate to both, increase the sustainability of organic waste management, which Sea to Sky Soils has obviously been working on for 10, 12 years now. And the other, part of the puzzle that they bring to the table is generation of renewable natural gas. So I'm sure you're aware you can take organics and make a renewable natural gas from them and upgrade that and send it to the pipeline. So that's not on the cards for Sea to Sky Soils at this point, but that's something that the company as a whole is interested in and running a couple of operations generating gas at this stage and keen to expand that. So Evergen's really got to focus on maintaining and growing relationships with local stakeholders, municipalities, First Nations, waste generators, compost and soil users. And so that's part of the reason for this meeting. We kind of realized recently that we haven't done, kind of update presentation to the council in quite some time, if ever. So again, thanks for the time to be able to give you a quick update here. So 2021 year, kind of looking back, we lost one of the large organic waste contracts that we had in place that ended partway through the year and was not renewed with us. So that meant that there was less stuff coming in the door, but still just over 30,000 tons of organic waste was processed in 2021. So that's great. That's all stuff that was kept out of the landfill and, is not generating methane in a landfill. It's being used to generate compost and soil amenders, and the nutrients are kept in the food cycle. So that's good. The fact that this contract was lost also meant that there was some, available capacity on site and some new opportunities as well that we tried to seize on. So this waste, as I mentioned, is turned into compost and soil amenders, and that is used in the local market by landscapers and farmers. We make a organic listed compost, so organic farmers are often using it in the region as well. With a mandate to kind of promote food security in the region, we do our best to make it available and accessible to farmers, and generally that is taken up a lot. A lot of the compost goes back to farms. So economic support, our whole staff right now is First Nations, either from Lil'wat Nation or Squamish Nation mostly. And the land also is owned by Lil'wat Capital Assets, the Lil'wat Business Group. So from lease payments and wages and staff benefits, just over $500,000 of money came from Sea to Sky Soils to the Lil'wat community. So that's something we're proud of as well, and want to keep that relationship going. And again, we'll try and grow and build new relationships wherever we can. We're often making donations to local groups of soil, sometimes cash. We were in a position last year where we could make a small scholarship to the What Nation. So we do that kind of thing where we can. So our goal is to get back to a place where we're not operating on kind of a bit more of a feast or famine type setup where we have less coming in the door and then there's an opportunity and we have a lot coming in the door. The goal is to get back to a point where we have a steady stream of organic waste coming in the door. This past year we lost this contract, so the volumes went down for a while. And then at the end of the year, you're all aware, we had crazy floods throughout the Fraser Valley in November and December. And that had a couple of major impacts on our business. One was that there was a lot of livestock that died. We were contacted by the Ministry of Agriculture and asked if we could help the farmers to manage particularly the dead chickens, hundreds of thousands of dead chickens in farms mixed with sawdust and bedding. And it was sitting in farms with nowhere to go really. And it couldn't really go to many. There were a couple of other composters still operating, but a lot of the food and yard waste from the Metro Vancouver Lower Mainland area goes to the interior of the province. And those highways were all shut off after the floods as well. So not only were the extra material in the chickens, but there was also the regular food and yard waste that now couldn't go to its current home because of the road closures. So we did our best to take some of that stuff. We took just a small percentage, but it had been sitting in farms and barns for a while before it came to us in floods. It was not pretty stuff. My heart goes up to the farmers who lost, their livestock and their livelihood at the same time, and then had to clean up the mess. So we were dealing with this material that we normally wouldn't take in higher volumes than we would normally get in November and December, and it was odorous. So we were smellier than we want to be throughout some of the winter. There was some chatter amongst the community. I'm sure some of you heard about that or experienced it yourself as you drove by. So we're doing our best to get on top of that. That's coming down and will continue to come down as that material goes through the process turned into compost. There's also, as anything, there's sort of speculation as to what's happening with this stuff. People wonder if maybe these chickens are being burned or buried or, treated in some disrespectful, nefarious kind of way. So, rest assured, we're following all of the certainly all of the regulations, and we go on above and beyond the regulations when it comes to meeting the criteria for making good compost. We're a pretty high quality facility compared to a lot of the ones in the province with respect to our infrastructure and our skill base. We've got a bunch of people on staff who know composting well and have taught courses in it and know both the science and the operations of it. So we had the Ministry of Environment came out last week. They frequently do. They regulate compost facilities. We have a new permit that's been issued by them, just a draft permit at this stage, but waiting for a final that won't really have a big impact on us, but will come with some increased environmental controls that we'll talk about it in a sec. But often when the Ministry of Environment comes for an inspection, if they find things that they are not satisfied or happy with, then you get a nasty inspection report soon after that. And there's been no indication that that's coming or that there's any problems with the site. So that's great news for us. So some of the areas that we were able to support the community in the last while, I mentioned some of the payments just for lease and staff. We also feel that the sustainability aspect of the business is really important, that we maintain the nutrients that are in the organic waste in a food cycle, keep those in use in compost and soil rather than send them to the landfill where they can never be recovered. It's an example of a real circular economy. We talk about this a lot, but having something that actually comes from a waste and is generated into a product, it's rare and it's not easy. We work hard at every day, but we feel good about doing that. And then we made lots of donations, primarily soil. We're generally not in a position to donate much in the way of cash, unfortunately, but we have donated a lot of soil to various groups there. You can see the list in the slide. So going forward, the odor that people are talking about will certainly be coming down as this, kind of higher volume, more odorous material is working through the system and turning into, good rich compost. And then with the permit, there will be some extra infrastructure happening on site that's generally focused on increasing environmental protections. So as time goes on, as you would hope, the Ministry of Environment expects a higher standard of environmental protection. And so, as years go on, we're asked to take more on, and we try and take on even more than we're required. So there will be some stormwater capture and treatment happening on the site, some extra paving and a treatment pond for stormwater, some site security, so fencing and cameras. And we're kind of considering power. Right now we're off the grid running on diesel generators, but that's not the easiest to maintain, generators as your main power source, particularly when you get cold stretches in winter. Diesel engines often don't really like starting and running then. So we probably will look into in more detail the feasibility of getting mains power out to the site, both for us and for the other operators in the area at the gravel pit and things. And then also this year, we'll be looking more at more stringent environmental monitoring. So anything that leaves the site, compost that leaves the site is tested all the time already and will continue to be so. Any stormwater that is running off the site will be tested much more thoroughly in the future as well. So, so that will be some changes that happen. So this slide kind of sums up what we do. The fact that we focus on food security, and we think that for good production, we need good soil. We've heard time and time again from local farmers that they feel that our compost is great for food production. So that's kind of one of the things that we really feel proud about, that it does get used again. This is not just a waste that then gets, buried in a hill, or some low quality product that gets used for some industrial site reclamation type stuff. It's quite high quality compost, and people like it and continue to use it. So the company as a whole will continue to explore things like energy production, and maybe at some point it makes sense for the Sea to Sky Soil site to be looking at that as well, but that's much further down the road, probably at least a few years. So that's all I've got from the way of slides, but I wanted to open up the floor to see if there's any questions or any dialogue that anybody has or wants to talk through.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for the presentation. It's nice to get the update, so thank you very much. Any questions from council? That's good.
Yeah, Scott, thanks for the presentation. Just wondering, I think we've talked about this before out at the site. Have you ever thought about putting in greenhouses and using the heat from the compost to run those?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great fit. You have some heat generation in the compost piles. You have some CO2 generation from composting. Both those things are great for greenhouse. You also have a source of soil growing medium right there. We have certainly considered it. Land is at such a premium, and we are, we don't have power onto the site. So keeping a greenhouse warm in the winter would be a logistic, that we would need to be figuring out. But we certainly have explored it a bit, greenhouses, and we've done a summer project a couple of years ago where we were looking at an outdoor nursery, using some of our products to start seedlings and saplings and growing those on the site. There's probably a good fit there. None of us currently are strong agriculturalists, so we would be needing to rely on some of the other Pemberton experts, I think, for actually growing the food. But that's something that, we've talked about a little bit and probably will look at more, I would think.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I'm wondering if you have any strategies for reducing plastic.
Yeah, good question. Plastic is kind of the perennial issue with composters. I've worked at a number of compost sites and visited many more. Our site actually has a lot less plastic on it than many of the sites I've visited. Some of them you walk on and it feels like you're walking onto a landfill just littered with plastic. And what we do now is primarily manual removal. So we have people whose full-time job it is to pick plastic out of the piles. So it's not a glamorous job at all. You're out there in the rain and the mud and the dust and the heat, pulling somebody else's garbage out of the piles. So there's a few aspects to solving the problem. A big one is education. The more we can get people to stop throwing plastic in their bins, the better off the whole system works. think that's something that we would really like to support in whatever way we can, although we don't have a direct line. We don't really have the resources to reach out and, you know, on community scale education from that point of view. And so then the other one is us operating the site and doing it in a way that we can, you know, feel confident and feel good about it. So if material comes in with more plastic, and if this continues to change, you know, there's some wild cards in the air right now with moving away from single-use plastics, and in some people's minds that means moving towards things like compostable plastics. So you know, we'll see how the dust settles and that kind of stuff, but if plastic content increases, at some point our handling costs go up and we can't afford to keep doing it at the same rate that we're doing it now. So that's the kind of thing that would happen in the long term. If people continue to throw more and more plastic in their compost bin, then we need to charge a higher tipping fee to cover our costs of actually pulling the plastic out. We are in the process right now of building a fairly simple picking line. So you can imagine people standing and bending over and picking up pieces of plastic is pretty, you know, it's hard on your body, it's pretty inefficient. And so we have set up and are in the stages of, you know, final stages of commissioning a picking plant where people are standing at a conveyor belt. And so they're standing in a comfortable position, they don't have to bend over, and the material is moving by them and they pick off the plastic as it moves by them on the conveyor belt. So that's sort of the main step we're taking for plastic removal this year. As a company, we're also exploring some of the fancier technology. You know, there's big machines that have blowers and suckers and you know, magnets and various kinds of various methods to remove contaminants. But those are big investment, and at this stage we just aren't in a position to do that, particularly because none of them are perfect. You still have to pick out you know, whatever bits of plastic you didn't get. So for this stage, we're going to focus on continuing manual removal and improving our ability to do that by building this picking line.
Have you worked with the staff at the SLRD in terms with the waste management plan and some of the communications they do in terms of the education piece on plastic?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so we work as closely as we can with the SLRD and the Solid Waste Management Plan, Resource Plan, and the municipality of Whistler and District Squamish. You know, we try all of those groups who are doing good work, and I think doing their best to you make sure that people know, you know, to throw the right thing in the right bin. And, you know, some work better than others, obviously. There's different challenges in different places, where there's higher levels of tourism, of people coming from somewhere else who aren't used to the systems in place. It's hard to, you know, to educate them at the bin, essentially. You know, they have a split second to look and think about what bin to throw it in, and people won't spend that long. They'll throw it in a bin. So we certainly work with them, and, you know, hopefully will in future as well. I mean, one of the groups that we try to support as well is Whistler Aware. So they do a lot of environmental education in general, and also sort of waste reduction stuff. So they have programs where they go to the schools and talk about all this kind of stuff. We also ourselves have, you know, and continue to run school groups. So in 2021, you know, things opened up enough again after the sort of COVID shutdown that we were able to run some school groups through the site again. So maybe 150 kids came through towards the end of 2021, and we talked through this kind of stuff. You know, well, I know JJ is a big advocate that the kids are really how you make the change in the future going forward. He talks about pop cans and the fact that when he was a kid, his parents would recycle pop cans, and he sort of forced that along at home. And, you know, we see that happening with the kids today as well. If we can get the kids to our site and show them that if you throw plastic in your organics bin, it ends up at the composter here, and somebody else has to pick it out. You know, hopefully kids will get on their parents and say, hey, mom, hey, dad, don't put that in that bin. So there's definitely a bunch of attacks to try and solve the problem. It probably never fully goes away, but we keep working at it.
Any other questions?
It's just been really nice to see your business grow and evolve over the years. You guys are a huge asset to the community, and thanks for the update.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Yeah, we're definitely proud to be here in Pemberton, and, you know, love being part of the community. So would like to be here for a long time. So, I mean, I don't know if it makes sense, but we thought that maybe it'd be appropriate for us to give your group an update every year or two and just let you know what's happening. I don't know if this is the forum for that or quite what, but happy to do that whenever seems like the right frequency.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think once a year would be good, especially there'll be new council in place and yeah, your work is important to our GHG goals and our climate action goals. So having you guys in your facility and in our communities is huge for us. So I think an update every year would be great. Just to get it out on the table, flesh it out. Part of the chatter you mentioned around the community and the smell is that it's no longer just the chickens, that there's been human waste and other waste that's been added to the pile that's carrying on the smell. What we smell on the highway now is still related to the chickens, or is it going to be ongoing after that?
Yeah, I mean, no composter has zero smell. You know, there will be some, and there is some biosolids from wastewater treatment plants that comes to the site and is treated in its own area of the site. You know, that's happened to some small extent for a long time. The Whistler composter has such big fluctuate, you know, they compost biosolids there. They get such big fluctuations in their volumes that they have sometimes asked us to take, you know, to support them in the peak periods. And so in the last little while, we've also been able to sign an agreement with Pemberton, where we're starting to take some from the Pemberton wastewater treatment plant as well. But the main part of the odor now is sort of the chickens working their way through the system. So they're pretty rich feedstock. You know, they'll make rich compost as well, but it's odor that's fairly hard to control and takes some time. And especially when it comes in a big blast like that, you know, one big volume, it's hard to process it all at once. So as we go forward, the smell will continue to come down. I'm not going to tell you that it's going to be zero, because there probably will be some. You might smell it as you drive by, but to much less extent than you have over the last few months.
Okay, thanks for that clarity. I do get asked, so it's nice to be able to respond clearly.
Yeah.
And thanks again for joining us tonight, you guys. Have a great night, and
Thanks very much for the time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, next up, we have Ms. Nicole Jean to present us on rodenticide concerns.
I don't know if I could ask them a question or not.
Already going.
Okay. So then I hit join.
Yes, join today.
Thanks. All right. Oh, we already have it. Oh, and then share screen.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, I guess it's on you.
I think I got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I talked to the SLRD. They had their meeting last week, or was it on losing track? Maybe it was. Yeah, I think it was last week. But they're like, what organization do you represent? And I'm like, I don't represent any organization. I'm just here as a concerned citizen. I've lived in the Pemberton area for 30 years. And I have never had this experience before, but last spring, my partner and I were hiking near the base of Mount Currie, and we found a dead hawk. And we were like, oh, that's kind of weird. What would have killed this hawk? You know, maybe an eagle was, you know, what would have that been? And had really no clue about the effects of rodenticides on birds of prey at that time. And then in the summer, we were biking along Collins Road, and there was another hawk in the road. It wasn't dead this time. It was alive, but it was very sick. And, you know, we made the assumption it had been hit by a car to start with. And it's a long story short, but basically we were unable to capture the hawk. It flew into this, about, I don't know, 6 foot high grass in someone's property. Meanwhile, I had rushed to go get a carrier from the Namaski's house to put it in to try and take it to a rescue center. And she's like, oh, one just dropped out of the sky yesterday as well. And then I was like, okay, that is too weird. So this is 3 hawks now this year, and I haven't had, never really experienced this before. So I phoned, there's actually a wild bird mortality hotline that the province is running. So I phoned them and they're like, oh, it's probably rodenticides. It's very, very common. And in fact, 6 days ago, the province banned this 2nd generation rodenticide because it's become such a problem across the province. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, never imagined that that was a problem locally. And I kind of took it upon myself to make up a flyer for the people in my neighborhood, which is Pemberton. I'm actually in the SLRD in Pemberton North. And I talked to over 30 homeowners. Some were in the village because I started down in the Glen, moved all down Erdle, down Collins, down Overson, etc. And just kind of got a feel, like told people about the new bylaw, because in the new provincial bylaw, residents are not supposed to use these 2nd generation rodenticides anymore. And just if they had it stored, not to use it. And got a good feel for how many people were having rodent problems. And I was quite surprised. For me, I have a fairly new house. It's really rat proof. So, and I know they're outside, but I haven't had any in my house. But I was quite surprised, stories were coming out like, oh, I had 5 dead rats on the driveway, last week when I went outside. And I was like, whoa, why is that? Oh, well, we're using a pest control company. And how many people were using pest control companies? How many people had just like, oh, I got a little bit of rodenticide from a friend. And, so it's just really kind of eye-opening. So I was glad I did that, and everybody was very receptive to, learning a little bit about it, to kind of saying, oh yeah, okay, I won't use it. And that was fine. But then in February again, my partner and I were hiking up the Glider Launch Trail, and we found a barred owl that was in distress, this guy here. And he didn't make it. We were going to try and save him, but by the time we got him back to the car, it was pretty much dead. He has gone down to Abbotsford, where there's a wildlife testing lab to get tested for these rodenticides. But I think it's just becoming a very big problem. I broke my leg last February, so I haven't exactly been moving around a lot, and I found 3 of these dead birds of prey. So I just wanted to raise awareness in our community that this is starting to become a problem. And barred owls are one of the worst, which is what this guy and the hawks. But it can also affect coyotes, wolves. They'll eat these, dogs, like pets, cats who eat dead rodents, that they find. I'm just hoping to kind of let council know that it is becoming a problem in our community. And I'm glad that the province is, this temporary ban, it's only a 18-month temporary ban that they've created in July. I'm asking kind of council to support the province moving towards a permanent ban. And not just banning the 2nd generation rodenticides, which are very, they bioaccumulate very quickly and are very lethal, but to ban all rodenticides, because they're all a very nasty way to die to start with, whether you're a rodent or a dog or a cat or, a larger animal. And there are now more modern ways to control rodents. There's a similar thing to rodenticide, which is cellulose-based. It's a corn cellulose, and it comes in a very similar looking pellet as a rodenticide that works. There's a new product out of Australia, which is basically this, it looks like a cordless drill, but really it's got like a sniffer thing in it. The rodent sniffs the bait, and a CO2 cartridge shoots a bolt through the rodent's head. And that's quite effective. You can buy that on Amazon. But unfortunately, you can also on Amazon.ca still buy the rodenticide, and even the more potent ones. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to raise awareness of the problem that's starting to develop in our area. I used to on Collins Road or Overson see lots of hawks sitting on the wires or on the posts. I haven't seen one, well, since the one last summer that was dying. So yeah, that's kind of all I really wanted to say. Also that, I guess I could also mention that there are at least 20 other municipalities in the province who have created like rodent action municipal plans for their own property where they have decided not to use rodenticides at all and kind of set a good example for the public. And, you know, also just created information for their residents through mail outs with taxes or what have you.
Nicole?
Yeah.
Any questions?
Sorry.
Councillor Noble and Councillor Cutter?
Thanks for bringing this forward. It's such an important topic, and I've been seeing signs of it too on my street. I'm over on Clover. Last summer I saw a rat. It was wandering down the street, bleeding out its nose, uncoordinated, clearly been poisoned too.
Yeah, with the new provincial like bylaw, or I guess it's not a bylaw because it's provincial, but the new provincial regulations, it bans the second generation for homeowners, but pest control companies, they're still allowed to use it. So when I did, you know, my sweep of my area, the people who are using pest control, they don't really know what is being used. You know, if I owned a pest control company and was kind of wanted the easy way out, that's the cheapest and easiest way to solve the problem. So
Funny, I just had this discussion with someone randomly this morning that was talking about getting pest control, and I asked them to clear all the places they can nest away from the building.
yeah, there's lots of other things. So stopping the rodents from, you know, there's a lot of good information from the SPCA and the Ministry of Environment online about, you know, first removing places they can hide around your home and, you know, making sure there's no entrances to get in. And then there are alternative ways, even the old fashioned like snap. Right?
They have some good snap ones that you don't risk losing your fingers on anymore.
Oh, okay. Yeah. 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 So I don't know, other than this, so this is the flyer, kind of, it was on the Pemberton Valley, or sorry, the Pemberton Wildlife Association added this. I made this. This is kind of what I made for the residents around my area, this little flyer, and just how to control the rodent population. But, you know, it was surprising how long it took me to talk. Like, it took me days to go and talk to all these people, because everyone wanted to chat and get on I was kind of crippled to get on my bike and move a little bit. And it would just be nice if this could be more of a regional approach rather than me. I had my daughter put a post on Facebook because I don't have social media, and, you know, we had over like, I don't know what the people do, like or whatever, you know, over 200 of those, and lots of comments from other people. Actually, I forgot to mention that, who were like, oh, I found this little bird, this little owl froze to death. And I'm like, owls don't freeze to death. Actually, they get sick and then, you know, die. And, you know, Christy Reed, she found an owl in the bathtub trail, Michelle DeJong, like so many people were like, oh, I found a dead hawk. So it's not just me as well. So it's quite an interesting thing. So.
There's been, I know too, in the last, I'm gonna say 10 years, there's been a lot more of a rat presence than there was. In fact,
I was going to ask the soil people that, because that was something that was brought up too. You know, I know a lot of people complain about the soil, but
that's more of a chatter as well than
yes,
based in truth.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's, however it's coming, over the last 10 years, farmers and in town, we've noticed a lot more.
Yeah. I don't remember them when I first came.
That's correct. Did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole, for the presentation. Did you get a chance to get the hawks examined to see what?
Not the hawks, this owl, right? Oh, this one, he's gone, but we haven't received the data yet.
Okay, but you didn't send the hawks in to find
No,
out
we
if
didn't
that's
send
what
the
killed it?
hawks.
So we don't know for sure it was.
No, we don't, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Just so you know, there was a conversation around this at council late in 2021. And the resolution that came out of that was that staff be directed to draft a report for review at a future meeting, including information regarding how other municipalities are addressing the issue, sample bylaws, and options for the SLRD in it. So thank you so much for bringing it forward. It has hit our radar, and we do expect a report to figure out how we could support.
Okay.
And also as part of that, we'll definitely look at how we can use our communication channels to help spread the word.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and the SLRD was hoping to work with the village. I think it was it Ryan Gwendolyn who was there? Yeah, he was there too.
Good report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, we're gonna do it. Okay.
Okay, so next up we're on 11C, the third delegation from the House Sound Women's Society. Who ended up joining us? Or is joining us?
Shannon?
Shannon Murray's, okay. Good evening, Ms. Murray. Thank you for joining us.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. And when you're comfortable, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Unfortunately, something came up with Shannon, some dental surgery, so kind of popping in. So hopefully I can answer all your questions with this. But essentially, we're hoping that the Village of Pemberton will join Squamish and Whistler in creating increased awareness for sexual assault. What we're hoping to do is make April a Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And we're just looking for all the communities in the Sea to Sky corridor to proclamate it for us as a way to sort of basically put forward the intention for the increased awareness in our communities. We see this not only as a foundational act of political support, but support in a way that aims to prevent sexual violence in our communities by just kind of putting it out there to all of our members and saying that this is an important thing, and we're hoping to educate and bring awareness in the corridor for everyone that it is unfortunately something that does happen. But our hope is that by educating everyone and bringing awareness to the issue, that we can help to prevent it in any way. Yeah, so we have lots of different activities planned for this month. Conversations with people, presentations, just sharing public awareness campaigns on social media, our clothesline project, which happens on the second week, which is more of a public or more of like an art installation that's happening in Squamish and in Whistler. Yeah, so I think there was lots of information in the proclamation, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have around that.
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Murray. And just to be clear, we did make the proclamation. Or we didn't have we haven't declared it. You moved it. My bad.
Sorry.
So and it was more just to have this quick conversation, just to be able to understand the activities you're doing, and that was sort of the purpose of tonight. So open it up to any questions or comments from council. Councilor Antolini.
Do we have any kind of policy around proclamations or anything like that?
We do. We proclaim, our policy is to make proclamations on items or issues that are relevant to our community, and subject to the group or requesters attending council. Either they can make a presentation or they just need to be in council chambers or part of as an attendee. But the focus is on community, issues that affect our community, are relevant to our community.
And can we have overlapping proclamations? Because I see we've got Pitch-In Week, we're talking about a proclamation for April 17th.
Yes, you can proclaim, some communities proclaim everything. Other communities proclaim nothing. And we are kind of the in-between, where if it's relevant to our own community, then council will consider making a proclamation. So yes, we can overlap proclamations, certainly.
Right. Well, I think it's a great idea. And the only thing that comes to mind is that I think the real gains will be made speaking to children. And so, you know, in the elementary schools right now, they use the word consent because it makes the topic more approachable. And I'm wondering if, you know, we want to start the conversation in a gentler manner for children, that might be some kind of language we want to consider.
Yeah, and we do generally right now we focus on, I think it's grade 5 and 6 in Squamish because we have the middle school, and we do grade 6 and 7 in Whistler and Pemberton. We do presentations in the schools. We try to capture every grade 6, 7 class in the corridor, and we talk about healthy relationships. We talk about sexting, boundaries, and consent is one of the main topics as well. So it's very much wrapped around what a healthy relationship looks like. And this is not always just in intimate relationships, but it's also in peer relationships and just in general, like relationships with everyone in your life and kind of how to make those healthy. And consent is a big piece of that conversation with the kids. Part of wanting to sort of use April as Sexual Assault Awareness Month is really to sort of build those education pieces and awareness pieces into the communities. I know we won't have a chance to kind of tackle everything, given this is our first year, but our hope is that we can kind of learn, and each year we kind of include more pieces. Though we're trying to make this month, we're really kind of tackle this month fully. Our hope is that this is something that we're going to be doing throughout the year. It's not just going to be in April. It just sort of helps us to symbolize, I think, the month. And I know that quite a few other provinces have April as Sexual Assault Awareness Month, as well as in the States as well. So it is something that's broader than just our community. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Councillor Noble.
I was wondering what kinds of events and tools you plan to provide in the month.
Yeah, so we have a couple. I know one of our workers is going to do the alphabet soup walk at the end of the month, and so that's a gender diverse club that meets, and she's going to go and just talk about consent and sexual assault awareness and things like that. We have reached out to lots of the bars, and we're hoping to get some stickers and magnets that say consent is sexy. So those we're going to be giving out to places so they can just kind of hand them out. Also at the end of the month, we're doing a workshop on, it's somewhat related to sexual assault, but it's more around trafficking. So training service providers on to how to sort of what trafficking is, maybe how to, it looks very different in our communities. So, you know, what it looks like in our communities and how we can help people that might be experiencing trafficking. So that's going to be done by Justice for Girls. We're also doing the Clothesline Project. So that's in the Whistler Library. So that's the public art display of people's images or experiences with gender-based violence. So that includes sexual violence as well. And so that's in the Whistler Public Library, and then within different businesses in Squamish and in the Pearls Value and Vintage window. And then just sharing lots of tools and information on social media as well. And then just some other conversations through the social groups that we already kind of do within the drop-in centers.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much again for joining us and for the information, and thank you for the work that you do.
Okay, yep. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Would council like to consider a proclamation? And so there's no suggested wording here, so
It's
just
just to
just to
declare,
declare the month.
declare the
Yeah.
month Sexual Assault Awareness Month,
Yeah.
April, and sexual health.
Moved by Councillor Antonelli, seconded by Councillor Craddock. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, that takes us to number 12, Office of the CAO, verbal report. Ms. Fraser,
I do not have a verbal report today.
right? And Lindsay's going to join us for the pitching week, or?
No, she is off today, so I will pitch in for pitching.
Perfect. Take it away.
So thank you, council, for considering this report today. Pitchin Week, Pitchin Canada Week is April 17th through 23rd this year. And it is one of the largest environmental improvement campaigns that takes place in Canada. The village and neighboring municipalities have been challenged to participate in Pitchin Week campaign by the SLRD that facilitates waste management in our area. And they themselves have proclaimed, the SLRD board in February, proclaimed April 17th to 23rd Pitchin Week, and a proclamation is attached to this report. The village has participated in Pitchin Week over the years a number of times. Through COVID, things sort of changed, and generally what we would do is have all of the staff would get together and we'd put on high-vis vests and we'd go out and we'd pick a section of the village and clean up, and we'd be out there with our garbage bags and our pickers, and it was great fun, and we would get quite competitive out there. And so we haven't done it for the last few years because we did a mini one, I think, a couple of years ago, but nothing significant because of COVID, the impacts that that's had, and the fact that a lot of us were working from home. So staff is proposing this year to get back into the swing of this and register a pitch-in event on the date. We'll promote the Village of Pemberton Pitchin Week through our online platforms, encourage residents and businesses through our online platforms and those promotions to also participate, issue a proclamation declaring April 17th to 23rd Pitchin Canada Week. And we are recommending that on Pitchin Day, which is, Pitchin Day.
Just looking for it,
I think it's a date that has not yet been determined. We have to pick that date, and that'll be the date that regional district, it's a date for us to pick, depending on where we are, or we could partner up with the regional district. And that we do a 20-minute walk within our municipal boundaries to pick up garbage along the way. We have done a lot of work previous years in the Y-land behind us here. And we've also done work between the staircase out to the bluffs, Beechwood. Those are two areas that we have focused on in the past. So, and as part of that, we'll get garbage bags and everything from Public Works. So what we're seeking from council today is that mayor and council issue a proclamation declaring April 17th and 23rd as Pitchin Week across the village of Pemberton, and that Pitchin Week initiatives set out in this report be endorsed. And just on that note, I found a rather nasty stash of garbage in and around the school, so I have emailed the school and suggested that they might want to participate in Pitchin Week and get out there and clean up that rather nasty lunch spot mess.
Awesome. Any questions or thoughts? Okay, would somebody like to make the recommendation as laid out, that we make the proclamation and that we engage in the Pitchin Week initiatives? Councilor Noble, seconded by Councilor Antonelli. Any discussion?
Friendship Trail might be a nice place to hit up.
It's
To
not
get
too
the
bad.
stuff blowing off the traffic.
Yeah, we'll see when the water recedes. Right now, I just wrote it wasn't too bad, but we'll see as the water goes down. Yeah. Any opposed? Motion carries.
I would like to thank Lindsay for Lindsay Anik, our executive assistant, for throwing this together at the last minute after we received the call to action. We felt obliged to make it happen, so.
Well, let us know as soon as you know what day, so we can try to
Yeah.
participate. Pick up.
Great, thank you.
Bit of a segue, come on in. Bit of a segue, and there's a program going on supported by our Arts Council where they're doing, I don't know if you guys have seen this, they're doing art pieces out of garbage that was pulled out of the lakes and streams. Have you heard about this?
No, I don't know.
And an artist was showing me some of his pieces the other day. Unbelievable what he did with like beer cans and an old paddle, and it's this beautiful fish coming out of the water. So and I don't remember exactly where, but the Arts Council is working with their counterparts, and there will be a display somewhere around Pemberton of some of the art. So keep your eyes open for that.
And they will be doing it again this year
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
So
it's really cool.
so it double duties. It cleans up the bottom of the lake and creates artwork out of.
I was amazed by what I saw already. I mean, I'm not very artsy, but I didn't expect something so great. Okay, we're on 12B operations, water conservation plan. Mr. Chima, thanks for being here. It's all yours when you're ready.
Thanks for having me. I think I have to join as a
You
panelist.
don't need to unless you want to share.
Oh, I don't have anything images to share, no. Okay, well, thank you for having me this evening, Mayor and Council. Hello, sorry, I don't want to give you that, but so I'm here tonight to present to Council the Village of Pemberton Water Conservation Plan Technical Memorandum dated February 14th. This is a document, just to give a bit of a background. I've probably talked about this before, but following several discussions with consultants around infrastructure upgrades, specifically for water systems, we identified a need for a water conservation plan. This is partly because a lot of grants that are for infrastructure upgrades require you to have a water conservation plan. Obviously, the funders don't want to fund improvements to your system when you're wasting water elsewhere. So that's a large part of it, but also we've, as I've discussed in the past as well, water conservation is very important for us. And we've identified that we have a very high per capita water use in Pemberton. I did prepare a few figures. We actually, using the latest census data, I have some better per capita numbers than what's in this report, because of course we published a report probably 2 days after they released the census data. But regardless, our per capita, so per person per day water uses for the year on average is 562 liters per person. Now the Canadian average is 335 liters per person. So that's almost 2 times, it's 1.7 times the average Canadian. And Canada is considered quite high on the world stage of water. Just to comment on that too, I mean, I think water is one of these things, you know, especially in Canada, we're surrounded by water. There's water everywhere. People don't really think of it as this precious commodity, but it is. I mean, not only on a world stage, but even just what goes into treating and distributing water. I don't think people realize how much is behind that, you know, just opening the tap and having water there. People take that for granted. So just wanted to comment on that. But essentially this report prepared by our consultants identifies some key areas that we can focus on to improve our water conservation efforts, as well as some targets, specific targets that we're shooting for. So the goal would be in the next 10 years to reduce our per capita water use by 15%. Now that's actually still above the Canadian average. So that would get us to 477 liters per person per day. I'd like to be even more ambitious, at least get to the Canadian average, if not better. But yeah, for the purpose of this report, that's one of our targets. Just to put that also into context, during the summer, we use extremely high water use. That's what makes up for most of the increase. The maximum daily use that we see is 1,252 liters per person per day during the highest day. So that it's quite substantial. If you can imagine 1,200 liters, I don't think anyone in this room probably uses 1,200 liters personally, but that obviously includes leaks in the system. watering your lawn, that's a huge one. Outdoor water use is a huge waste of water. People watering their lawns, 50% of that water ends up evaporating or going on the sidewalk and or getting blown in the wind. And that's water that's been chlorinated, treated, distributed, pumped through the system. So that's, it's also dollars going down the drain as well. Sorry, I'll bring it back to my report, but discussion comments. The Pemberton Creek Aquifer is an unconfined system. So essentially it has a recharge rate. It gets replenished by Pemberton Creek through an underground aquifer. That recharge rate we've estimated is about 30 liters per second over the whole year. So relative to our water use right now, our average daily use is about 21 liters per second. So we're still below that recharge rate. We've talked about, our capacity of our water system. That's largely based on this aquifer recharge rate. Because even if we have another well within that aquifer, that's what we estimate that the aquifer recharges at. So once we get to that 30 liters per second usage average, then essentially we'd be depleting that aquifer and potentially causing unreversible damage and running out of water, essentially. We have estimates that will be in the next 25 to 30 years. But obviously we want to try and extend that lifetime by reducing our water usage. So just also to put it in perspective, that daily use, I mentioned the 1,200 liters per person per day in the hottest day of the year, and when everyone was watering their lawns, that works out to 49 liters per second. So that's well above that 30 liter per second recharge rate. The important thing is that we average that over the whole year. So if you use a lot of water in the summer, that aquifer does recharge throughout the winter when you're not using as much water. But the goal is to basically keep that daily demand as low as possible. Sorry, I'll try not to keep it too technical. I just get a bit excited about these numbers. So essentially the report, I won't go through the entire memo. It's attached in the appendix, but it's laid out some targets, as I mentioned. Those targets are to keep that supply flow rate at 25 liters per second over the whole year. So more or less where we're at now. To not exceed the maximum daily demand of 50 liters per second. That is what we were at this year, maximum daily demand. So basically on our hottest days, we shouldn't use more water than what we used last year on our hottest day. We want to not have that go up any higher. The average daily demand I mentioned, to get that down to about 450 liters per person per day, which is a 15% decrease from what we're at now. And then also the same with the maximum daily demand to get that down to 900 liters per day. Obviously, when you're looking at these figures, you expect that there's, during summer, more people are using water. You have those maximum daily demands, and then there's the average for the year. So the plan also identified 7 key measures, which again, I won't go into too much detail, but basically they are regulation. So that's bylaw enforcement. We have an outdoor water use bylaw. We declare during certain times of year, and it's based on what we're seeing in usage. We have levels of watering restrictions, and then going out and enforcing that. That's been a challenge, as we know. Bylaw enforcement has been a challenge in the village for the last couple of years. And also usually people are watering at like 3 a.m. if they have an automated irrigation system. So identifying that and then also enforcing it is rather difficult. There's retail metering. Now I have 4 of these actions related to metering. And I know that this has been discussed in the past and hasn't been pursued on a universal metering scale anyways. But essentially it's identified as one of the key components to conserving water. Obviously, if you know who's using what water, it's a lot easier to target how much, first of all, you can bill them more. High water users can be billed more, but also maybe you can identify leaks or overuse or ways that can be conserved as well. So that includes the retail metering, the consumption-based metering. Now we do have that for certain properties. We have industrial, some businesses we require to have water metering, mainly in the industrial park, which I should note is actually not on our water system. We purchase water from Mount Currie for the industrial park. That's the main reason we have the metering in place. But I'd like to see a little bit more metering throughout the village as well. And we've kind of identified some key businesses that we want to start rolling that out to. A big one was water loss management. So that's leak detection, finding where in the system there's failures that might be wasting water. We did find a leak 4 or 5 years ago that we identified and repaired. And I'm sorry, I don't have the stats with me here, but we saw something like a 10% decrease in our water usage just from that one leak. That was obviously a very large leak. It can happen. If there's a pipe in the ground that's leaking, you might not identify it. And so we've actually budgeted this year for some more leak detection devices that use radio frequencies to determine flows from pipes. And you're meant to basically set them up on the pipes overnight when presumably there's low water usage, and it can identify if there's still flow and so forth. We also have our zone meters, which we use to try and determine that as well. Demand management program. So that's in my eyes sort of the communication program, communicating how important water conservation is. And I think that's really a huge element of this. We had a bit of a campaign last year, just trying to provide some of the statistics. I think I presented to council and had, 600 toilets up on the screen and showed you that this is how many toilet flushes that your leaky tap attributes every week or something like that. So, we've been trying to be creative with that, but it's always hard to get that messaging out. And as I said, we've grown a bit complacent as a society on how precious this commodity is. So, we're going to try and come up with more strategies like that to communicate. One of their suggestions, reporting usage and water budgets on the water bills. I mean, again, that's dependent on having metering based water bills, but we could even do that on some of our, water rates bills. We could just include some of these statistics, just another way to get the messaging out. And then the last item is to maintain and update this water conservation plan, with the target being every 5 years, but obviously we can do adjustments to it internally as frequently as we want. So I mentioned this, that most grant funders do require a water conservation plan. And so that was an important element and reason why we developed this, but also we had one from 10 years ago that needed updating. So essentially, what I'd like to present this report to council for and recommend that it's received, and then we'd like to also post it on our website. Oh, I'm sorry, and I should mention that in terms of interdepartmental impacts, we would be working with the communications team on rolling out some of that. Obviously, working with finance around the billing side of things, and then there's also development, planning, and building in terms of enforcing. And bylaw enforcement, enforcing water restrictions. Our newest part of these reports, the Community Climate Action Plan. Obviously, I think this goes hand in hand with that Community Climate Action Plan. Not only depleting aquifers is bad for the environment, but also water use affects wastewater generation, which is more wastewater being put it into natural waterways. So obviously we have an effective wastewater treatment plant operation, but still, if you can minimize the amount of effluent flows, that's less impact on the environment. So I think, and then there's the other part of it, which is water treatment, electricity, and other, buildings that are there for treating water. All these things have impacts on the environment. So I think that the Community Climate Action Plan, this kind of goes hand in hand. On a note, impacts on regional and neighboring jurisdictions. I mentioned that we purchase water from Lilwat. So although the water use out in the industrial park is not really impacting our water system, it still is very critical that we apply all of our water conservation efforts towards the industrial park as well, because we have a water use agreement with them. And so as we see increased water usage out there, it's really important that we continue to manage that as well. And then also there's the Squamish Willow Regional District, who we provide water to the to the Pemberton North water system. And so they've been identified as a high user and potential for especially like the outdoor water use in the summer. So we want to try and work with them. Usually they just kind of share our information on water conservation, but I think I'd like to try and make more of a concerted effort in that area to also encourage water conservation. So that was all the items in my report. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Mr. Chimo. Any questions?
Thanks very much. Thanks for your report. It's always a big issue, water. And the big corners of the future are going to be about is water. So we got to consider it. On page 41, and it's under the ISL report, number 3 is a real concern for me. Over 40% of the water we supply to Pembroke North is water loss. So are we being paid for that from the meter going out, or is that the difference between what we're producing for them and how much we're getting paid?
No, so that they've made some assumptions there. I should state that I actually am not confident in that figure. That was one item that I brought back to our consultants, that I'm not sure how they got to that value, but no, that would be what they expect. Is like, we're still getting paid for the water that's being supplied to them. It's just estimating that much, that 39% of the water we're providing them is not being used. Either it's wasted in terms of like outdoor water use. And I think that's based on the average per capita use of what people would use. They're saying that there's potential to reduce that amount of water use by 39%. So it's water loss either through leaks, through outdoor water use, et cetera. But no, that everything that's going through the meter, they're getting billed for, and that's the total amount.
So what can the village of Pemberton do? What kind of bylaw can we put in place, or do we have one that will secure the water source going out there? So, I mean, between that loss and our loss,
that would be included in our loss. So that water is being supplied to Pemberton North, and they estimate that potentially we can reduce that amount of water that's being supplied to them by 39%, because there's potential leaks and other, watering of grass and these types of things.
but it also says in number 2 that the village of Pemberton is losing about 22% of their annual water. So 22 plus 40%. So which one is correct? The 40% loss or the 22% overall?
The overall percentage, I think it states here, the annual total is that 31%.
32%.
So I think that's the overall.
That's the overall?
Yes,
That's a huge.
that's combined. It is a huge amount.
Huge amount. And I know years and years ago, we put in these fairly substantial costs at that time, leak detectors. That have never worked, to my understanding, or if they've worked, they haven't been followed up on or kept track of. Where are we at with that?
So there, to my knowledge, there's not been any leak detectors installed or implemented. I know that there was zone metering done, and those are in place, and we've been working on trying to get better data from those. Essentially, all that does is it just gives us points in neighborhoods that we can look at the usage and then just see, they've increased by 10% this year. What's happened there? And try and analyze that. Now that involves an operator going and taking meter reads. We do that quarterly, but that's not really enough data, like to see, okay, this quarter this neighborhood used this much water. It's good year over year, especially for a place like, say, the Glen that's been all built out. There's not much change in terms of, there's not added buildings, there's not much change in usage. So maybe, you know, for example, I don't have the data to verify this, but let's say during COVID, a bunch of people got pools. In the Glen, we saw an increase of 10% of water use. And it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. That maybe it's because a bunch of people got pools. We can identify things like that, or we could say, oh, maybe there's a leak there. And then we start doing leak detection to try and determine what that water use is. So the zone metering is an important part of it. And as I said, it involves an operator actually going and reading the meters. So we've started doing that on a weekly basis during the summer months, because I think that's the key months that I mentioned that we're seeing these hugely high numbers. What's interesting, actually, this past year, we saw the overall usage increase by only 3%, but during the months of June, July, August, we had a 16% increase from the previous June, July, August. So we actually saw reduced usage in the non-summer season, which, you know, still on the year, it was an increase, but that, to put it in numbers, 300,000 cubic meters in June, July, August of last year, as opposed to 259,000 the year before for those 3 months, whereas the annual total was less of a gap. It was 676 compared to 700. So we actually made up for some of that usage in June, July, August throughout the year in other conservation efforts. So just to go back to your question, there may have been focuses on this in the past. I can't say as to why they've been unsuccessful. I did point out that there have been major leaks identified and fixed that have reduced our usage. We're still lower than our 2015 usage rates right now. We're kind of looking only at the last 3 years because now we're starting to see an upward trend, but we need to do more. And that's what I intend on doing.
Because I mean, that amount of water loss, even if, you know, the number is 30, 31, 32, that's, think of that, how much can stay in the ground and we can use so much longer.
Absolutely.
And I think that should be, I know it is for you, but it's got to be a top priority for the community. That's, the water loss just concerns me because that's treated water.
Absolutely.
It costs us a lot of money to put that in the pipes, that if it's leakage or whatever it is, it's a problem.
Well, and that includes, right, you have a dripping tap that is just dripping. You know, and I think that was some of the statistics I prepared last time. I actually went and printed them out, but, you know, well, first of all, outdoor water use, 50% of all outdoor water use is wasted. They consider that wasted because it's not actually getting to the roots of the grass or the flowers or whatever, just from evaporation, wind, etc. But, you know, if you have a dripping tap or hose, they say that's it can waste 680 liters per week just on little drips here and there. That's the equivalent of 300 loads of laundry. You can imagine running 300 loads of laundry in a week. That would be an insane amount of water use. And that can be what you have from just a tap dripping, right? Or the average household leaks. So, you know, I think we have to get that messaging out there, and that's what we've been trying to do. But not all waste, that 32% is like water mains that are spewing water. It's every little bit. It's your toilet that runs. Oh yeah, I've been meaning to fix that, but that adds up. You know, leaking toilet valve, that can add up to 14 bathtubs worth of water in a month, right? Every little bit helps. And you know, we're looking at other communities, especially if you look at like Australia, we're getting a lot of information from them because it's a huge thing, right? In some other places, water conservation. So we're just trying to look at how do people get these messaging out, and how do we continue to encourage people that they can make a difference, and just by fixing the flapper valve on their toilet, or helping to identify. I mean, one of the tips we said, if you put food coloring in the toilet bowl or in the cistern of your toilet, and you see that in the bowl it changes color, that means you have a leak. Like without flushing, that means that you have a leak in that valve, and that can add up to significant savings. Now, part of the other problem is everyone generally residential pays a flat rate for water. And so, yeah, if you got a bill that said, whoa, I've used 10 times much more water this month, you'd probably start to think, where am I leaking? But without that metering, we can't identify that increase in usage. We can only look at the community as a whole or at our zone metering or et cetera. And that is a challenge. And it's something that, you know, I need to get a bit more of the history. I know that this was analyzed some years ago, and I think we were quite close to going ahead and implementing universal metering, but there was some software challenges with the accounting systems. There was the labor involved in an operator going out, reading these meters. But, you know, the technology's come a long way, and it might be a huge cost, but it might have huge cost savings in ultimately. So it's something that I'd like to look into a little bit more too. And it was interesting having the consultants prepare this report. That, as I mentioned, I think there were 3 or 4 of the 7 key measures had something to do with the metering and billing of water. And those are, you know, they didn't really know so much the history of where we went with universal metering, but it's pretty clear that that's a critical component to it. So I'm going to try and start with, you know, key commercial businesses that use a lot of water, but I think ultimately that, you know, that's where we're going to have to go in the long term.
So along those lines, I've been waiting to ask the question and hearing that you need to dig deeper on that. I don't expect a really specific response, but you know, what are we looking at? If we wanted to go to universal metering, obviously there's a requirement of each household to install one within their intake. And from the village side, what kind of infrastructure and labor would we be looking at to manage that? Yeah, I mean, as I said, I haven't investigated that fully. I know that at the time that this was discussed, that was a huge part of why it didn't go through, was because, and I think that it had something to do with our billing software and the communication between the metering devices. But I'm confident that there's more efficient ways now. And in fact, you know, we've been looking at, for example, the zone metering. We've been doing some SCADA upgrades, our communication systems, just for our internal systems. And you can get meters now that just talk to SCADA that you don't even have to go out and do a reading. I mean, look, that's how hydro works now, right? Nobody has to go around scanning every hydro meter, but that's what they used to do. So I am confident that there's, at least on the labor of implementing it, of facilitating it, but implementing it is a whole other thing. You know, going and having every home put in a water meter, it's quite an endeavor. And I mean, I think that there would be a lot of cost to the village. We'd probably have to supply those meters at the very least. Maybe owners have to install them, but yeah, it would be a significant cost. But I don't know if that, I'm not making that recommendation personally, but that is definitely recommended in the report. Well, that's a big jumped out of me too, how much it was referenced. So that's okay. Thanks. Any other questions?
Maybe it would be worthwhile putting meters in new homes, like from here on out.
I think that was also discussed at that time. In fact, even some of the subdivisions include meter vaults, like I know the Ridge, they all have a meter vault, and that's a strata. So we don't really do the same service connection inspections that we do on other homes, but we've had many contractors contact us and say, what is the reason for this vault? And they have to do some plumbing in between because that was abandoned. I think it was right around the time that we were going to implement all new builds had to have metering. And then this development went through and they put these vaults in so that people could put meters when they do their connection. And now everyone's kind of hooking up pipes to just get through the vault. But yeah, I mean, that could be an option, especially with some of the newer developments. I think we would need to go up and put that through bylaw, we'd have to update our bylaw, which in fact we have on the books. We want to update our water rates bylaw and water service connection bylaw. But yeah, I mean, that again, I think I would need to do a little bit more research on the implications of that, but it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I think that might be worthwhile. The other question I had was about our population, and how we're looking at that. So it says we're using that best fit line and we're getting 4,700 people by 2040.
Mhm.
But then it also says there's a possibility of in the next 5 to 10 years having 1,800 more people, which would put us at, what is it, like 5,300 by 2032. So there's a little bit, quite a difference there. And I'm wondering if that will change your mind on some of this.
So that piece is the most difficult. From when we very first started our sort of whole system assessment, when we started looking at treatment, when we started looking at sources, this has been the key part that we've just been scratching our heads on, is how do we predict the population growth? Now, I should clarify that they've taken both of these into account when putting together this table, in that we've looked at the developments that we know are going through or, you know, planned, and their densities and the population increases expected from them. And then also looked at past population growth and seen a very, very linear trend. And so the linear trend was decided because, you know, there's ebbs and flows of these things. And so there might be a boom now, but then it might slow down. Based on that, we obviously wanted to take into account how much development we're aware of that's in the near, 5 to 10 years, or I think it was, 5 to 10 years, that we're basing off of development proposals. But then the overall value is expected to be at that rate. So I guess you could say that it's expected that there's a bit of a spike and then a lull that would average out to that rate. But that being said, we had also, I actually asked the consultants to put in this 2021 census. It was literally the last change on this report, because I said, I think it came out a few days after they had finished this report. So we couldn't go back and change all the trends, because it would be basically restarting the whole plan. But our projected 2025 population was 30,500, whereas our 2021 census data is 3,400. So that's suggesting only 100 more people in the next 4 years, which obviously doesn't make sense given especially the development that we're going to see. So I do have some concern that this is an underestimate on our population growth. And that's why I like to talk in terms of liters per second, in terms of our average daily demand, because there's the per capita. It's important to think about how much each person is using, but ultimately our capacity is based on liters and how much that aquifer recharges itself. So as we see population grow, that's the finite item is how much water there is. So I think we've also talked about, we haven't talked about it here, but exploring new sources and trying to find, dip into another aquifer. And that's definitely something that we're hoping will prop this up. If we have treatment for manganese and iron, then we can use the Lillooet aquifer. And then we have that capacity is not so much of an issue, but regardless, we want to try and keep our rates like as it's described in this report.
Any questions? A little bit along those lines as the meter, but and you're probably not the right one to ask because it's not your department, but through these recommendations, within our building bylaw, what our requirements are for low volume fixtures, shower fixtures, taps, and should we, is there a recommendation coming out of this report that we consider requiring 2-tank toilets so that you have the single flush, the bigger tank, and those sorts of requirements within our building bylaw?
I think that, as you said, I don't know the details of it, but I know that, with some of the changes, the most recent changes to our building bylaw, there's been a lot of incorporations into, there's the step code changes as well. And part of that is water conservation. So, and I know that the consultants mentioned that some of this is already current and going on, and it's just implementing. I think there are requirements. I can't speak to the specifics of what they are, but perhaps Ms. Kennedy knows that.
We aren't, as a municipality, we can't make requirements that go beyond building code, except for the step code, which of course is part of the building code. So no, we can't make a requirement for fixtures. For us, no.
Or even,
But
because
it
like
is
you
encouraged, it is encouraged.
here, when you referenced Australia, they've had the double flusher, for the smaller tank for 15 years.
Mhm.
They've had that, and you still rarely see it in Canada, right?
Mhm.
But we can't require that because
That's
it's
something I know.
You can't do it through building bylaw, but I guess there could be incentives or
Incentives.
Back to the metering.
even just educational elements too, right? But
And I guess last question, seeing what the water spike in those 3 months last year, and especially during the heat dome, are you looking at, are you thinking that increasing the water level restrictions a little sooner these days, or did you change your plan a little bit on that?
yeah, thank you for the question. I've actually been working on, we don't really have, to be honest, a very systematic way of setting those limits. Usually we just keep a close eye on what our usage is. And, I sort of have some penciled benchmarks. Okay, once we hit 2,500 cubic meters in a day, like we should talk about this. But we also often look at the forecast. So, you might see days where there's high use, but then, it's going to be cool the next week or two. Let's not roll that out until. So oftentimes we'll see, there's a big heat wave coming. This is when we roll that out. Because, we take out an ad in the paper, we put stuff on our social media. And so if you see that on June 1st, just because, that's when they take effect, then people might forget about it, and the heat wave might not hit till July. And so sometimes I do try and time the increase of levels. We don't have a policy on how to set those currently. It's something that I've been playing with the last couple of years, but and also I think if you just go, okay, we're level 3 restriction, everyone sort of, it's just like, what, this is arbitrary. So we do try and, to go with, but definitely we're always, especially in the summer, very closely monitoring our water use on the day. And, I printed them in case you guys asked me, but I do have every single day of the last 3 years, our usage. And it's something that I'm looking at all the time. We look at, weekly reporting, monthly reporting, et cetera. So it's definitely something that we're monitoring. And then, we start to see some interesting trends. I mentioned, that actually our overall usage, if you don't count those 3 months, would have been less than previous years. We saw our lowest day of the year last year is the lowest I've ever seen in my time here. It was 20% lower than any of our other lowest days from previous years. I can't really explain that. And I think that it's more than likely, well, I hope that some of our messaging has been effective, and that the conservation, like people have been fixing leaking taps. And maybe it's just our own leaks, maybe it's just our own irrigation, turning that down. But yeah, the big usage is obviously during the hot months. So I try and time the restrictions to be exactly when that's coming.
And I hear your point that you don't want to put it on too early, because then people don't really pay attention. On the other hand, I go back to your point that people think, wow, it's been raining for 4 days, and they see water everywhere. So they don't think there's a shortage until we hit 35 degrees. And, so it's a bit of a psychology to it.
If I may make one more comment, what was really interesting last year was our biggest usage day was, I think, June 29th. And that was, we had a flood warning issue because of the snow melt. The rivers were quite high. So I had so many people telling me, why is there water restrictions? Look at, we're about to get flooded. They're telling us we got to evacuate, and you're telling me I can't water it, and I said, yeah, if we could put a pump in the river and supply your drinking water with that, then absolutely, we'd be fine. But that's not how it works. So it is something that I think people don't really understand.
Keep working with the public on that. Thank you for that very in-depth report. We're obviously very committed to it, so thank you. I'm looking for a motion that the report be received, and that the water conservation plan be posted on the Village of Pemberton webpage. Moved by Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Antonelli. Any further discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks again, Tom.
Thank you very much for this evening.
Number 15, bylaws. There you go, waiting in the wings. Okay, so on 13A, 1, which is first and second reading of the Village of Pemberton zoning bylaw 832 amendment. It's a housekeeping item for bylaw number 921/2022. Mr. Brown, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I get my screen set up here. I just got a short presentation on these. Over what we proposed. All right. So good evening. It's good to see everyone in person. I met everyone in the little boxes, but not all together yet. So it's great to be here. So what we have for you tonight is housekeeping zoning amendment bylaw. I'll just run through a few slides just to explain everything. They're housekeeping amendments because they're purely administrative. You're going through and correcting some errors that we've discovered over time, and just providing clarifications where through our day-to-day use of the bylaw, we find like where we're constantly getting building plans that are interpreting something a little bit differently than we are or what's intended. So yeah, it's intended to clean it up, hopefully be more efficient, more user friendly. So I'll just go quickly through them. The first one is almost all administrative. This is the part of the bylaw that no one really reads. It corrects and adds some language that we need to apply the bylaw properly, and it provides the right links to legislation so that we can enforce it. We've added a number of definitions, things that were missing, to clarifying the difference between a balcony and a deck. And then, yeah, the rest of the amendments are really adding a word here or there, changing a word here or there. Again, cleaning up some confusions that we found, and then correcting any errors that we found. Again, you'll notice carriage house says pop up a number of times. It's a common theme, but again, they're very minor adjustments, but things that we picked up on. Going through, so again, carriage houses, and really it's about tweaking things. In the cases of storage containers, it's adding the rural residential, so a rural property where they would naturally be. And then one for the recreation site as we develop it. Currently, our bylaw limits storage containers to 2 per property. And so relieving that for the new recreation site gives us some flexibility as that site develops on a temporary basis, and all through village's approval as we go through that. I wanted to point out as well, so on the retaining walls, so we are adding in the term finished grade to that. That creates the same terms that we use when we measure building height, right? And it's about how we're measuring it. The actual height limit is not changing. It's still 1.2 meters, but that's just really creates some common language for how we're measuring heights in our bylaw. And so some more items in parking. adding different requirements. We had missed one of the lines in the original general requirements. And then, yeah, just adding carriage houses as a terminology, it was missing previously. And so, so adding it gives it the same requirement as a secondary suite would. So again, the last part there on the design criteria, that's added to make our zoning regulations line up with the building bylaw that was passed late last year. A few zone specific amendments. So we're removing references to accessory suites. There's just confusion using that term rather than a secondary suite. So removing that avoids that confusion. And then finally adding references for duplex in the RTA1 zone. Duplex was added as a housing type a couple of years ago, but this adds references down into the density lot and building regulations for the zone as well, where there was some questions on which we should go with that. And yes, so the option tonight, so option number one is what we're recommending is to waive the public hearing. This is available to us when we have a zoning bylaw and amendments that are consistent with the official community plan. There's also option there that if council wishes to go ahead with the public hearing, as is usual with the zoning amendment bylaw, that's there as well, or another option if you decide to send it back to staff. So yeah, so the recommendation for first and second reading tonight, so to waive the public hearing, and we'll bring the matter back once we're done with our notice requirements.
Mr. Brown, any questions? That's correct.
And probably just on page 52 of our agenda, talking about 7.1 and 7.10, that talks about the carriage houses.
Okay.
It says here, just a clarification, that carriage houses are permitted in the front yard in hillside zones.
Yes.
But they're only allowed above a detached garage.
That's correct. Yeah, so a carriage house is an accessory building that's detached from the principal house, right? So that it's not necessarily just the garage, but it's an accessory building.
So, but it has to be above the garage, so a garage has to be there first. It can't be a separate standalone building.
That's right. It can't be its own building.
Okay,
that's right.
And that's what I wanted, in my mind, I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so part of the clarifying as well is it needs to be above. It can't be a side by the back or something. Yeah.
I want to get that clear. Thank you very much. And a good report. Yeah, nice to clear these up. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, would somebody like to move the motion as recommended or another version? Councillor Craddock? Oh, Councillor, that's something.
I just wanted to say that I don't see any harm in holding the public hearing. So I don't see any concerns with this. It's all very comprehensive to me. But I'm wondering, if we have a public hearing and we advertise, then people will know about it and weigh in if they're inclined. And I'm wondering what's the harm in giving people that opportunity?
Question. I don't think there's harm in it for sure. I think it was more being mostly housekeeping that was really in need and therefore perhaps waiving it. But to your point, if we were to hold one, we generally hold public hearings of this nature before a regular council meeting. So in terms of what that would require from staff and would be the advertising.
We would advertise and hold it we generally try to hold public hearings in the evening if we can. The next council meeting is a 9 o'clock meeting. So we would hold it at 9 o'clock in the morning, or we would hold it at 7 p.m. that night after a full day of council. We have to advertise 2 times. So there's cost associated with that, which we have to do if we waive the public hearing anyway. And there's a staff report and presentation. Generally, when we've had these kind of bylaws come forward and where council staff has provided council the option of waiving a hearing or bringing it forward, we have found that there's been very little interest in those in terms of public interest and attendance. So the public hearing's been pretty short and brief. But it is up to council. It's your discretion as to whether you'd like to hold one or waive one. Advertising is required either way.
Yep.
It's a little more staff work to hold the public hearing.
And in terms of, like you mentioned, our next meeting's at 9, if we were to push it to the following meeting, so it's an evening.
It'd be
meeting.
May 17th before we had 3rd.
And is this something that staff would like in place for
This
sooner
bylaw has
rather than
been,
later?
yeah, this bylaw has been ready to bring forward now for 2.5 months. We've just been waiting and it's been bumped several times. So staff is quite anxious to get this across the finish line.
Okay, what would we like to do? Looking for a motion potentially for first, second reading and either to waive the public hearing or to go ahead with the public hearing. I'd like to for a motion, Councillor Crabbe.
I'll move the motion to waive the public hearing, and only for the fact that I think being it's housekeeping more than changing things that the public's going to weigh in on. I feel comfortable just going with the waiving.
I'll second it.
Second, further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown. Here's the second and that, and then we're on to village permanent fees and bylaw charges number 905, 2021. This is for adoption. We've seen this before. Would anybody like to move adoption of this? Councillor Caddick, second by Councillor Noble. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Awesome. Swinging.
Thank you.
Okay. We're on to item number 14, which is the mayor's report. I was away for a little bit with the provincial basketball provincials, and then I managed to sneak away for a little bit with my family during spring break. So I only have a few meetings to report on. The first would be going back to the middle of March, our last PVIS meeting, and the highlights out of there, I guess there would be 3 main items. Our recreation budget was brought forward. The budget is down and operational reserves are up. So that budget is tight and looking good. And the general budgets from PVIS, the shared services at PVIS are up about they're up 3.6% is what was presented by staff. But due to the non-market change, and this is, of course, is depending on whether your assessment went up or not or down, but in general, on average, that 3.6% increase has been absorbed by non-market change. So really, if you, based on $1 million home, one's taxes would go down by about $40. Again, getting absorbed by the non-market change. And again, depending on whether your assessment went up or down or stayed flat, or how much it went up. It's probably the most realistic, not down or flat. How much did it go up? And the other item that we discussed was around the transfer site, the transfer station, the development of the new one, and whether or not to include a free store as part of the plan at this point. So there was discussion that, the space could be used for permanent bins for either mattresses or drywall, and remove the free store as there is, some work involved and some costs around it. There was a discussion that having a free store on site does help diversion targets quite substantially, and that the committee felt at that point that we should keep the free store as part of the plan. We still have room on site to do a rotational pickup for bins for drywall, mattresses, and that sort of thing. They just wouldn't be on site all the time. So for X amount of weeks or a month, it would be drywall, or days and other times it would be mattresses and other sorts of things. But it was felt that keeping the free store as an option on the site is important to our diversion goals, and so it's been left in the plan.
Can we just discuss that now?
Yeah, for sure.
When we first approved the new site, it was specifically said that drywall and mattresses would be a constant pickup.
It was never specific that it would be a constant, it was that they would be accommodated.
Okay,
So
but-
the plan is to have, again, rotational bins for that.
and I never heard rotational before because I asked the question, would it be there so people could drop them off? And they said yes. I guess my concern is if I'm a contractor, I don't want to wait 2 weeks or a month to drop my drywall off. And that was a concern that we had to start with. And that's why I'm asking the question. All of a sudden, my hair goes up and thinking, okay, I'm a contractor and I can only bring it out 2 Mondays a month.
I don't know what the rotation would be, honestly. I don't know that that's been identified. And that is a concern because that's part of the diversion, making sure people aren't dumping illegally. There was hope with the original design, or before this design came through, that there would be more room on the site to accommodate it on a permanent basis. But it was identified quite a few months ago that that's not the case due to setbacks and flood construction levels and that sort of thing, that it would have to be accommodated on a rotational basis. So that's been discussed for a while. This report came to Peters to say, or if you like, we could look at removing the free store and having bins on a more permanent basis. Again, the conversation, recognizing your concerns, and I share them, that hopefully with a rotational basis, we'll still be able to accommodate contractors and that sort of waste, as well as the free store. The report in PIVA, which is available on the website, showed what percentage of potential garbage goes into the landfill that does get diverted through free store, and how it benefits some more vulnerable of our population. So yeah, I share your concerns, but it was agreed that the committee that keeping the free store was still a priority. And it was also, and the discussion was also, by the way, because it was uncertainty and people felt both ways, it's to go in a storage container. You don't have to be, set up with shelves and that sort of thing. So there'll be a cost to it. But the thought was to go with it for at least a year or so and review the value and how much demand there is for the other sorts of waste bins. If it's felt in a year or two that either there's an expansion of the site, or if not, the container could be sold and removed. So it will be evaluated down the road to make sure it's the right decision.
Okay, thank you.
Don't larger contractors typically have those bins brought right to their sites?
For the bigger stuff,
So
but
it would be more the smaller ones we'd be accommodating anyway?
I'd say that's generally fairly accurate, yeah. If you're doing a bigger job, you would get your own drywall bin to your site, because there's so much around drywall to separating the dates, making sure that the dates are on there. So yeah, bigger jobs generally would have their own bin. Smaller jobs or individuals or families, obviously not so much. Yeah, so that was it for PIVAS. RCMP, we had a meeting, CEO Fraser and myself, one of our regular meetings. This one was with Sergeant Dykstra as well as Corporal Langtree. Again, we're going to have a joint meeting with council. I think staff to staff was talking about setting up a date for that, which is where we left off at the meeting, but we'll follow up. And it was just more discussion about the summer coming up, recognizing that and anticipating that visitation is going to be pretty high. There's going to be a lot of traffic on the roads. How are we feeling? The questions were I put the question to Sergeant Dykstra, how he's feeling about staff levels. We are now fully staffed. So we have 5 members in a corporal. They're dedicated to Pemberton for the first time ever. We have our own dedicated force. Most of them live here. They work here. It's not a rotational basis. So they get to know the community. They get to know the ins and outs of the community. Sergeant Dykstra has really put a focus to not separating Pemberton out, but identifying Pemberton within the corridor. He shares the sense that for some years, policing in Pemberton has been sort of an add-on to the Sea to Sky corridor as opposed to really focused on its own. And so he's really trying to separate that out. Everything from staffing, he wants to look at whether there's need for more staff, the detachment across the street, the replacement of that detachment, whether it might coincide with work we're doing on the Muni Hall, that sort of thing. So that conversation is ongoing. And I asked him how he felt about the summer, not just from our own local aspect, but the highway budget that's put towards policing from the province. And also with regards to some discussions we've had with regards to policing in general and fire in terms of how much of their work is responding to the highway and people from out of town. How much we support that and how much of their services get sucked out onto the highway, and then perhaps they don't have the capacity to do some of the work they want to do here in the community. So there's discussion around that. And a little more locally, we spoke with Corporal Langtree about teenagers and the fact that the days are getting longer and kids are going to be out more and school's going to be out more and grad activities are going to be starting soon. And we know we had perhaps an unhealthy culture starting to build in our community around some of the teenage activities and the police response and how that was all going. Corporal Langtree, I can confidently say, is so committed to helping change that narrative. He's the one that's been out there sweeping the skateboard park at times on his own. He has a totally different approach to how he said straight up to a bunch of teenagers that reported back to me, not in this meeting, I don't want to chase kids around. And he said it to us in our meeting in different words. I don't want to chase kids around. I want to come talk to them. I want to, I don't want to get into what we saw last year and previously. So really committed. We've talked about doing an engagement with teenagers in the next weeks. What it could look like, how to keep building that relationship. So really, really positive conversation, I thought. And along those lines, the RCMP is looking at doing a town hall meeting so that the community can bring forward their concerns and thoughts and how they would like to see our community policed. So I'm really enjoying the regular meetings with them. I feel like there's a positive shift in terms of how policing is being approached in Pemberton. And we'll make sure that we have a joint council meeting with the RCMP really soon. Had a one-on-one meeting with the new CAO from the SLRD. Craig Dalton started the second week of March, I believe it was, and took the opportunity to have an hour meeting with him. Talk generally about the board issues, but to talk about our part of the regional district, how Pemberton interacts with the rest of the SLRD, and mostly to talk about how many mutual interests and shared services we have, and how important the relationship is between the Village of Pemberton and the SLRD in Area C, and that we want to continue building that relationship. I think there was a really good conversation there as well. Just really wanting to highlight how important the relationships are, that so much of the services and so much of the wants and needs of our community extend from the Village of Pemberton to Area C and beyond. So really want to keep building that relationship, and he looks forward to doing so. And he also shared a bit of his transition plan, which is now underway. He also shared more of that at the SLRD meeting. Councillor Zant, as you know, is not able to join us tonight. He actually covered me at the SLRD meeting last month, so I guess I'll report on that next time, but he did present more of his transition plan there. Not much else. The VCH meeting, really a lot of it was reflected in today's announcements. I don't know if you guys caught up in between our meetings, but it was reflected in Bonnie Henry's address. And in terms of continuing in terms of the vaccine, continuing to encourage the third dose, we heard the announcement in terms of how the fourth dose is being recommended. Vaccination will be shifting from the big drop-in clinics like we've been hosting at our community center to pharmacies and local doctors. And with that, their education and communication plan around encouraging vaccination will be shifting with it. Couple items coming up. Couple items coming up. On Thursday, April 14th, the community center is conducting a fitness center survey. This is to help look at what kind of services we're providing and how we can provide more and better services. So that survey will also give you a chance to win some prizes. So hopefully we can get some input on that. There is, please pass this one around because I know there's a lot of interested community members, but the Spelkumtum Community Forest virtual public information session. So the information session on our community forest is going to be held on Thursday, April 21st, 5:30 to 6:30, and it's on our village calendar at pemberton.ca. So please make an effort to pass that around. You can let it run.
Sorry. Not smartphone savvy. I thought I had it shut off.
Take the battery out.
Can you do that with my phone? Sorry.
That's all good. Another item coming up on Saturday, May 7th, it's the Wildfire Community Preparedness Day. That's going to be at the barn. It's also going to mark the end of the Emergency Preparedness Week, so stay tuned for some details on that. And last but certainly not least, tomorrow at 6 p.m. At the Community Center, we are presenting our Community Climate Action Plan. It starts at 6. There's an open house. We're going to have a showing of the movie Sam and Me, Lessons on a Life on Snow. There's going to be a panel and discussion. And again, it's our opportunity to present our climate action plan to the community. So I'm looking forward to that. And that's all I've got for the mayor's report. Any councilors' reports? Right, Councilor.
Yeah, a couple to report on. Tourism Pemberton. Things are going along very well. They're gearing up for what they expect is going to be a very busy season this year. They've just received another grant for about $260,000 to continue with their compostable toilet operation that is working extremely well. So things are going well with that. What they brought up at the meeting and asked if I would bring to council is they would still very much like to put a compostable toilet that's completely movable, and they maintain it completely at the parking area at the bottom of the Mackenzie Road, at that basin spot there. And it's something I would certainly encourage us to support. I ride my bicycle by there a lot of times, as I'm sure you do too. And I've seen anywhere up to 22 vehicles parked in there. And as a commercial on TV says, we all have to go. I wonder where they are going. So I would really like to see that supported, and maybe we can get one put in there. They're ready to put it in immediately. It's solar and it's compostable. So I think it's maybe a good opportunity because they have 2 available right now and they would be happy to put that in. So.
Well, we're building our amenity building and then washrooms down near the soccer fields, but I know we had this conversation before. Where did we leave off on it?
Well, we have porta potties already located at the rec site, and we have signage at the Mackenzie parking lot directing people to those porta potties. There are some concerns about that area being a wetland. So I would want to take it back to our operations group.
Well, let's get a motion to that effect so that it's on the table to have staff have a look at the viability of putting a compostable toilet at the Mackenzie Basin.
Yeah,
parking.
and maybe I could ask a question through the acting CEO. What difference does it make if it's in a wetland? This is compostable, completely enclosed.
I can't speak to that. I can't speak to that. I know it's been a concern that's been raised in the past. So that I can't speak to it, but I'd like to have our operations crew be able to look at that.
I'd certainly like to understand that, because when they're putting them into conservation zones and up at the lakes and that kind of thing, there's
There
no.
might be better places than others for it though. So I think it's a fair question, and let's have staff.
Yeah.
Bring that up. So you make that
I'll make
motion.
the motion that we do that, and without it coming back to council, if it's okay as far as the wetlands, we advise Tourism Pemberton to go ahead and put one on. Make it one motion.
That's the motion. Seconder. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much. And the second was a banking district meeting. And again, they're doing well. They're finished their sediment removal on airport and the Big Sky area out there. 12,500 meters square is complete.
It's done now?
Yeah, that one's finished. They're just about finished the ones up on the north Little Wet. And if you've been by that area, the huge stack of gravel is absolutely incredible. The other thing they're doing again, excuse me, is sending sediment in for testing. They still haven't found a commercial use for it. But again, if you look at the piles that are going up, if we could get someplace to sell some of that material, it would make a huge difference, because right now, the cost of moving it and trying to get money when you sell it is minimal. So it's a real issue. Excuse me, they're looking at putting some mounting gates on the culvert stubs. If you've been by where the Peaks and the Pioneer is, there's just stubs coming out so water can run freely. So they want to put some some mounting gates on there so they're controllable.
Like right at the back by the little
Yeah.
skills park there.
Yeah, so they're looking at doing that and they have that in budget for this year. Work in progress right now. They're working on the sediment removal on the Voyager, the beam, and the Balkan. And some other things they're working on. North Arm Channel, they're constructing a bar up in that area to try and get things moving more freely. Working on Pemberton Creek sediment removal contract. They're in negotiations to get that done, and hopefully they'll be in the water pretty quickly here. One thing that did come up that they're working on, or I got this rascal here. There seems to be, they identified an issue with a settling pond for Sunstone. So that's on the lower part at the far east end of what we call Denduff Park. You know, that big area that looks like a small lake. Apparently what's happening from the report is there's a lot of sediment getting into that. So that's causing a lot of problem in that area. Of course, as the sediment builds up, the water expands and they're not getting the same. So they're working with Sunstone on that to see if they can figure out how they're gonna fix that problem. And of course, that sediment then gets into the North Arm Channel. For this year, the Diking District is putting in a 4.8% increase. So the minimum of 2021 was $260. And now the minimum is going to go up to $360. So that's a fairly big increase for a lot of people on top of the 4.8%. Right now, they're working on some letters to do with the Harrow Road housing. That's if that social services building goes in. They've been asked to respond to a number of emails where people were concerned about it and how that's going to look. So they've been responding to those requests and comments. They don't feel that it is a problem, but they want to make people aware of what's going on. Right now, they're running a reasonable surplus. $100,000 of surplus is going into 2022 projects. And they hope to put about 46,000 into reserves for this year. And with the money problems they've brought to you before from their reports, they're still dealing a lot with the provincial government of if the Diking District can afford to continue to operate on their own or not. And so they're just doing a new study that will project through the next number of years to see how they're going to manage going forward. So good meeting, but interesting, but at the same time, they've got a lot of work to do to make it still be a viable operation. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we are on to correspondence for action. We have 5. First is regarding the high cost of housing in Pemberton, requesting the council consider a decrease in annual property taxes. Would like to make a comment, motion on this?
Yeah, I don't think we have the ability to decrease property taxes. That's set by the charter. So we can't help with that, unfortunately. And a cap on rent, I don't think we can put a cap on rent. And I guess what the problem is, it seems in the real estate industry, obviously, if you got a $400,000 house and a $300,000 mortgage, you can rent a suite for $600 a month. But the last house in the Glen sold for over 1.5 million. Now that same suite, they've got to charge 1,600 or 1,800 a month, or it doesn't work. So I don't personally know how we can put a cap on that.
Mhm.
It's just unfortunately real estate.
I'm wondering, as we get more bylaw staff in the future, if there's more opportunity to look into the Airbnb issues.
We monitor the Airbnb. The last time we looked at it was probably a month ago, and there weren't actually that many. And those that are operating are licensed. So, but they do pop up and then they disappear almost sometimes as soon as we identify them. The biggest challenge that we have, which I think we've provided that information to council in the past, is people are quite strategic in how they post their ads, and it's sometimes extremely difficult to figure out where the home is and who the owners are. But we certainly have it on our track, and yes, that's one of our priority issues, is to continue to monitor that and follow up when we are able to. So, yeah, absolutely.
Any other comments? Would somebody like to make a motion to have staff respond to Ms. Chasson?
Treason?
Shattuck, seconded by Councilor Noble. For the discussion, any opposed? Motion carries. Next up is the letter expressing concerns regarding the proposed Harrow Road Affordable Housing Project. We have a handful of others of these. The recommendation that the staff respond, advising of the approval process for the project and assuring the correspondents that their comments will receive consideration when the application is brought forward. Would you like to make that motion? Mr. Craddock, seconded by Councilor Noble. Discussion. Any opposed? Motion carries. And then we have two letters, not in order here. I guess we could just do them separately. The first is from Mr. Perry regarding expressing concerns regarding the non-farm use application for a proposed RV park at 1641 Airport Road. And the recommendations that staff be directed to respond to Mr. Perry, advising of the approval process for the project. And this is important, noting that the village has not given its approval of the proposal and that comments received will be considered during the application should it proceed beyond the ALC application. And I think it should be clear within that correspondence that, I think it's implied there, but that the village has not approved the application, rather sent it on to the ALC for their comments on the value of the farmlands and their considerations before even considering this any further. I just want to make sure, I know there is some confusion in the community that we have sent it to the next stage. This is the very first step, is to have the ALC input before we even consider anything further. So. Somebody like to make that motion? Councilor Noble, second by Councilor Craddock. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. The next up is regarding expressing concerns regarding the 64-unit development proposed for the property located at 7340 Crabapple Court. Recommendation to have staff respond to Ms. Ellingson. Would you like to move that? Councilor Noble, seconded by Councilor.
I was just thinking about it, sorry. Was that the co-housing one?
That was the co-housing one, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So I don't know if I'm curious whether this letter got lost because we looked at that a long time ago. Or was it-
Yeah.
It was received on March 18th, hand delivered. So
Oh my gosh.
there was some discussion taking place in the community.
Sure. Okay. So seconded by Councilor Antonelli. For the discussion, opposed, motion carries. And last up is also on the opposition to the RV park on Airport Road. Move the recommendation as presented to have staff respond. Councilor Craddock, seconded by, we'll be going to question period after, sir. seconded by Councillor Noble. Any opposed? Motion carries. And then we have 11 correspondence for information. Would anybody like to pull any of the correspondence out?
Move to receive and file.
Move received by Councillor Caddick, seconded by Councillor Noble. Any opposed? Motion carries. Decision on late business. Late business, there's a motion and question period. So the commencement of the regular council meeting is now open for questions from the public. Please be reminded that only questions directly related to items discussed during this meeting are permitted. If there are any members attending via Zoom and you wish to ask a question, please click the raise hand feature in the webinar controls and staff to notify staff that you'd like to ask a question, and you will unmute your microphone when it's your turn to speak. So I open it for questions. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, I'm Barry Sonnenfeld. I'm 5. This is Susan, my wife. Can you help me understand when the ALC will make a decision, or what would make you want to do that RV park independently of what they?
I'll try to answer that a little bit. So the first part, in terms of when the ALC would respond, depends on their load of applications right now. It depends how much analysis they feel they need to put into the application, therefore how much time they need to respond. Honestly, their turnaround time really varies a lot over the months and years. Sometimes applications take a while to come back, other times it's quickly. So I can't answer to that specifically. When the application came forward, there was to us, or not the application, when the concept came forward to this table, there was a fairly general conversation as to the economic benefits to having an RV park in the community, some of the challenges as to where that could be located, seeing as how everything in the valley is either agricultural land or potentially in the flood plain, and therefore the other options would be moving up into the hillside, which pose other challenges to development, like cost and the fact that most of it is crown land once you move up the hillside. So recognition that it could be an important economic driver, but a challenge in terms of where and how it can be located. As for this concept, when it was discussed at the table, again, it was discussed at a fairly high level. Density, the size of it was definitely flagged by all of council. I think that's fair. Please tell me if I'm speaking out of turn, but I feel like that was a fair comment or concern from the rest of the council at that point. And definitely a large discussion around the agricultural value of the land. And if it were to be pulled out of the land reserve, very, very likely that it would never become back to the land reserve. So when we get applications like that, which is rare for the village because we only have a certain amount of farmland within the village boundaries, an application like that comes forward, our options at that point were to refer it to the ALC with our support, refer to the ALC with showing no support, or to refer it with and remain silent and just wait for them to come back. So we referred it with the comments that there were concerned around impacts to the neighbors, density, access, highway. So it was referred to the ALC with those concerns in mind, asking them for their evaluation of the value of that farmland, the classification of that farmland. And that's as far as it's gotten with us. So the next steps, if the ALC says no, it's dead. If the ALC were to respond and say that that is a possibility, it would be come back to council, and there would be a much more in-depth discussion through the application process as to how it could look, and all the concerns that I've already mentioned and more would come up, as well as consideration for folks like yourselves that have already provided comment on.
Thanks for that clarification. That was great. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Welcome.
Thanks for coming out.
It's so interesting. We're relatively new here, and pleasure to meet you guys. Thank you.
Eric's video the host sometime, they're more interesting.
I like the ringtone though.
I'm going to pay my boyfriend to phone me just so I can learn how to hang up on him without answering when I get home.
There's a button on the side that turns it off.
It is on my flip phone.
Hang on, we can
Second
get
one
into
is
that
on.
later. Any questions on participants?
There are no questions from the Zoom participants.
Thank you. Then I will look for a motion to go back in camera. Noble, second by Councillor Craddock, any opposed? Motion carries. Kick Scott out.
Goodbye.